The Honorable, the Speaker.
Almighty God, we give thanks to you, the creator of the universe, and humbly beseech you to direct and prosper the deliberations of the members of this house here assembled for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established among us for all generations. Amen, amen, namaste.
Oath or affirmation announcements by the Speaker.
Honorable members, Dr. Bohindradat Tuhari, MP, member for Caroni Central, Dr. Fuad Khan, MP, member for Guaracara San Juan, and Mr. Prakash Ramada, MP, member for St. Augustine, have requested leave of absence from today's sitting of the House. The leave which the members seek is granted.
Bills brought from the Senate, petitions, papers.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have the honor to lay the following paper. The annual administrative report of the Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Business Development Limited for the year ended December 31st, 2016.
Reports from committees. Prime Minister's questions, urgent questions, questions on notice. Requests for leave to move the adjournment of the House on definite matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers. Personal explanations, introduction of bills. Motions relating to the business or sittings of the House and moved by a minister. Public business, government business, bills, second reading.
The Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move that a bill entitled An Act to Vest Certain Assets of Petroleum Company Limited of Trinidad and Tobago, Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited, in Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited, and the Guaracara Refining Company Limited, to vest certain assets of Trinidad and Tobago Oil Company Limited and Trinidad and Tobago Petroleum Company Limited in the Guaracara Refining Company Limited, and to vest Palo Seco Agricultural Enterprises Limited lands in Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, be now read a second time. Before you this afternoon, Madam Speaker, is the Miscellaneous Provisions Heritage Petroleum, Paria Fuel Trading, and Guaracara Refining Vesting Bill 2018. The objective of this bill is to vest certain assets, undertakings, and obligations currently held by the Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited, or PetroTrin for short, the Trinidad and Tobago Oil Company Limited, or TRINTOC, and the Trinidad and Tobago Petroleum Company Limited, Trintopec, as well as the Palaseco Agricultural Enterprises Limited, PSAEL, into 3 newly incorporated companies, namely Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited, and Guaracara Refining Company Limited. As you may be aware, Madam Speaker, a decision has been taken to discontinue the major refining operations of Petrotrin as of November 30th, 2018, and to establish new businesses for exploration and production, terminaling and refining, which will take place on December 1st, 2018, just less than 3 weeks from today. The decision to repurpose Petrotrin, or restructure Petrotrin, is a better word, and to establish a new business model was informed by a comprehensive assessment of the existing operations of Petrotrin, undertaken by its current board of directors and backed by high-quality analytical reports generated by international and local consultants. All previous efforts to redesign the existing business model at Petrotrin had failed. The purchase of the refinery in 1985 by the government of Trinidad and Tobago took place in the context of refinery economics, which was deteriorating as the changing fuel environment demanded cleaner standards for fuel technologies in local and foreign markets. Madam Speaker, all of the plant upgrades failed to improve the efficiency of the refinery to meet the standards for the internationally marketable products. The cost of these upgrades loaded the company with debt of approximately $12 billion, of which $5.8 billion is due in August 2019. More recently, the government has been guaranteeing the loans of Petrotrin, which as at October 31st, 2018, amount to $2.7 billion in loan guarantees. By way of further example, the gasoline optimization program was completed in 2013 at a cost of $12.6 billion, up from an initial cost of $2.45 billion. The gas to liquids plant remained incomplete, and its cost rose from $1.55 billion to $3.15 billion. The ultra-low sulfur diesel complex cannot be operated, although its cost rose from $791 million to $2.9 billion, and we are told it would take a further $2.5 billion to rectify the defects in its structural specifications. Madam Speaker, this debt was and is unsustainable, especially in the context of an employee base of approximately 3,400 permanent employees and 1,500 temporary employees, which required a monthly wage bill of $183 million, or $2.2 billion on an annual basis. Coupled with this wage bill was a medical plan, which was and is costing Petrotrin approximately $245 million per year. The survival of Petrotrin was now based on the non-payment of taxes and royalties to the government and procuring of government loan guarantees. The latest financials for the company provide the evidence that the company cannot generate a profit without restructuring and the establishment of a viable business model. In fact, there is deficient working capital of $6.6 billion. There was a 9-month loss in the refinery and marketing business units of $1.04 billion recently. $3.5 billion is owed in taxes. $5 billion represents short-term loans taken out by Petrotrin. $7 billion is required to upgrade the aging plant and equipment at Labrie. If not, major oil spills will continue unabated. And 50% of recurrent expenditure was accounted for by manpower costs. What happened, Madam Speaker? Because of this situation, the Exploration and Production Division of Petrotrin has been transferring its own requirements for investment resources. In other words, money that should have been spent on drilling and upgrading of plant and equipment was transferred to the refinery operations, where 100,000 barrels of crude oil per day were being purchased, the refining of which resulted in a loss of $3 million per day. This is equivalent, Madam Speaker, to a loss in refining of the imported crude of $1 billion per year. This business model had become obsolete and uncompetitive. Petrotrin could not continue in this condition. It required an immediate cash injection of $25 billion, and despite this, it is forecast that it will continue to accumulate losses at approximately $2 billion per annum. Moreover, land and marine oil production, starved for investment resources, which are being diverted to deal with the losses, or were being diverted to deal with the losses in the refinery, will continue to decline. It was these and other considerations which led the government to adopt a new and viable business model for Petrotrin. It is expected the new company will become profitable, internationally competitive, and would seek to reverse the decline in land and marine production for crude oil. It is expected it will become a leader in the local energy sector. It is expected it will be an employer of choice and a source of national pride. To facilitate this shift, 3 new companies were incorporated on October 5, 2018 to manage the new businesses as follows. Heritage Petroleum Company will manage exploration and production. Heritage Petroleum is located in Santa Flora and Point Fortin and will have responsibility for all exploration and production assets, including exploration and production contracts, with revenue generated through crude sales and crude oil storage. Fuel trading and product supply activities will be undertaken by the Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited, which is located in Pointe-a-Pierre. In addition to trading and product supply, Paria Fuel Trading will be responsible for logistics, terminaling, and product handling, and is expected to work closely with Heritage Petroleum. The Guaracara Refining Company Limited will be responsible for preservation of the refinery assets, in addition to providing utility services to Paria Fuel Trading and Petrotrin. It should be noted that although the major operations undertaken by Petrotrin will cease as of November 30, 2018, Petrotrin itself as a company will remain in existence and continue to operate. All of the issued and outstanding shares of Petrotrin, as well as the shares in Heritage Petroleum, Paria Fuel Trading, and Guaracara Refining, have been transferred to a new holding company, Trinidad Petroleum Holdings Limited. Petrotrin will remain operational as a member of the group of subsidiaries held by Trinidad Petroleum Holdings. This will allow Petrotrin to meet all of its outstanding contractual liabilities unhindered, and will elude the possibility of Petrotrin bondholders imposing a requirement that they approve the new structure for the company. Petrotrin will also continue to hold certain assets, specifically the assets that are not the subject of this vesting bill. Therefore, Madam Speaker, Heritage Petroleum, Paria Fuel Trading, and Guaracara Refining, together with Petrotrin, will form a new corporate structure under the umbrella of the new holding company. Trinidad Petroleum Holding holds the entire shareholding of the subsidiary companies, and its shares of Trinidad Petroleum Holding are in turn held by the corporation sole. Now, Madam Speaker, let me deal with some pertinent issues. With respect to refinancing its US $850 million bond due in August 2019, Petrotrin approached the financial markets in October 2018 for a firm or consortium to refinance its long-term bonds. 4 respondents were shortlisted and were invited to present their proposals on the 15th of October 2018. After several days of deliberation, it was decided that 2 of the consortiums would work together to execute what was essentially the financing of a combination of the Petrotrin exit costs as well as the 2 bonds, the 2019 bond and the 2022 bond. The consortium is made up of Credit Suisse, Bladex, and FCB, as well as the team of Morgan Stanley and Answer Merchant Bank. Over the last few weeks, progress has been made with the refinancing, and they are working towards having the first tranche of the exit costs settled by the 30th of November, and the bonds refinanced soon afterwards, well in advance of the August 2019 terminal date. Petrotrin has also been dealing with the rating agencies, with the assistance of the Ministry of Finance, on the restructuring to ensure that the risk and debt profile are properly articulated, communicated, and received in the international market. With respect to the refinery, I am advised, Madam Speaker, there has been a safe and incident-free shutdown of all refinery operations. I'm told that the last imported crude cargo was discharged on the 10th of October 2018, and that crude oil processing at the refinery ceased on the 19th of October 2018. I'm also advised that the last process unit at the refinery, FCCU, was shut down on the 3rd of November, and that refinery preservation and mothballing is currently in progress. I'm also told that the sulfuric acid regeneration is still in service to convert all spent acid to fresh acid in the system as part of the preservation exercise. The fresh acid will be sold locally for use in water treatment facilities. I'm also told, Madam Speaker, and this is a signal achievement of the current board of Petrotrin, management and board, that the first cargo of local crude was successfully exported on the 1st of November 2018. The third issue, the importation by Petrotrin of fuel, and that is to deal with the belief that our local crude is not marketable. Let me repeat. The first cargo of Trinidad and Tobago crude was successfully exported on the 1st of November 2018 at a good price. Importation by Petrotrin of fuel. Through a competitive bidding process in which reputable international suppliers were invited, Petrotrin has so far secured 4 cargoes of gasoline, jet fuel, and diesel, which have already been discharged at Pointe-à-Pierre during the period October to November. As part of its strategy to maintain security of supply, Petrotrin has maintained approximately 14 days of supply ex-refinery production, thus affording a seamless supply of fuel to the local and regional markets. A total of 16 cargoes, future cargoes, have been contracted to cover supply until early January 2019, and this process will continue. I now look at the rationale for this vesting bill. As the refinery operations of Petrotrin are being wound down, startup operations of the new corporate structure must be put in place. In order to ensure a smooth transition to full operation of the new companies by the 1st of December 2018, these companies must be vested with all necessary assets, undertakings, and obligations that will enable their seamless operation in accordance with their purpose. The assets currently held by Petrotrin are vast and varied and include land holdings, contracts, licenses, leases, oil fields, gas pipelines, as well as the Pointe-à-Pierre refinery assets that together facilitate the business operations of the company. Consequently, the most efficient and cost-effective method for the transfer of the Petrotrin assets to the new companies is through the vesting bill that we are debating today. seeking to achieve a transfer of assets by traditional conveyancing mechanisms would not only have been extremely costly and very complicated, but would also have resulted in an inordinate delay in months, possibly as long as a year, in the startup of the new companies. Additionally, transfer of all the land holdings, contractual obligations and liabilities, and business operations simultaneously to 3 separate entities would have necessitated a myriad of legal activities that in the current context are wholly impractical. These include surveying every individual parcel of land, preparing a detailed list of all chattels held, drafting and preparation of various title transfer documents and assignment instruments, and compliance with existing contractual requirements for assignment, just to name a few. As such, Madam Speaker, the only viable option available is simultaneous transfer of all the assets, undertakings, and obligations required to all the entities necessary, and that is the vesting of such assets by Act of Parliament. Members of this House will recall that vesting of assets by Act of Parliament is not new. It is the very method by which Petrotrin became seized and possessed of some of the property, assets, and rights it currently holds. Petrotrin was incorporated in 1993 to consolidate the interests of the Trinidad and Tobago Oil Company Limited, Trintoc, and the Trinidad and Tobago Petroleum Company Limited, Trintopec. In order to simplify the merger of those assets, the assets of Trintoc and Trintopec were vested in Petrotrin through the enactment of the Petrotrin Vesting Act, Chapter 6207. Trintoc and Trintopec are wholly owned state companies incorporated in 1974 and 1985 respectively. In fact, Trintoc was also vested with its assets by Act of Parliament, the Trinidad and Tobago Oil Company Limited Vesting Act, Chapter 6205, which was enacted in 1981. And it provided for the vesting of all of the assets, liabilities, and obligations of the Trinidad and Tobago Oil Company Limited, a company incorporated in the United Kingdom, and in Trintoc, a company incorporated in Trinidad and Tobago. The appointed day of that vesting was January the 1st, 1981. Looking at the bill before us, Madam Speaker, by Section 4 of the Act, the vesting of the undertakings allowed all contracts to which Trintoc and Trintopec were previously a party to be transferred to Petrotrin, and all of the collective agreements within the meaning of the Industrial Relations Act to be construed as if Petrotrin was a party, and further, that Petrotrin would be deemed to be the successor to Trintoc and Trintopec. Section 4 also allowed for certain other rights. This is the Petrotrin Vesting Act, sorry, Madam Speaker, not the bill before us today. Section 4 of that Act also allowed for certain other rights, obligations, and liabilities of Trintoc and Trintopec to be transferred to Petrotrin. These included an approved fund, plan, or scheme under the Income Tax Act, all financial accounts, all power of attorney instruments, any negotiable instrument or order for payment of money, any security held for the payment or discharge of a debt, liability, or obligation, any judgment or award obtained by or against Trintoc and Trintopec, and all contracts of employment. In short, Madam Speaker, and let me make it clear, I'm speaking about the Petrotrin Vesting Act of the 1990s. The effect of the Petrotrin Vesting Act was to permit the business operations of both Trintoc and Trintopec to not only be merged, but continue uninterrupted under the management of Petrotrin. The assets that are the subject of the Petrotrin Vesting Act are listed in 2 schedules to the Act. The first schedule details the property and rights automatically transferred to Petrotrin upon the operation of the Act. The second schedule sets out exceptions. That is the property that was not automatically transferred to Petrotrin and remained vested in Trintoc and Trintopec. Section 6 of the Petrotrin Vesting Act provides for the Minister of Finance by order to transfer the assets listed in the second schedule to Petrotrin. Any such order may or may not be subject to conditions. In March 2008, Cabinet agreed to the transfer of the non-core assets of Trintoc and Trintopec to Petrotrin in accordance with Section 6 of the Petrotrin Vesting Act. As such, the requisite order was prepared. I'm giving this history, Madam Speaker, to show that what we are doing today is not unique and it is not new. It has been done at least twice before. I'm advised that while in the process of finalizing the order to be executed by the then Minister of Finance in 8, the Office of the Attorney General indicated that the list of assets set out in the order omitted some of the assets that were intended to be transferred. The process of finalizing the order to effect the transfer was therefore aborted at that time. Against the backdrop, Madam Speaker, I wish to advise that an order pursuant to Section 6 of the Petroleum Vesting Act has been prepared. This order contains a complete listing of the non-core assets of Trintoc and Trintopec that are to be transferred to Petrotrin and will be executed and come into effect simultaneously with the coming into operation of the instant vesting bill. That date is December 1st, 2018. Trintoc and Trintopec possess certain additional assets that were not accounted for in that older Petrotrin Vesting Act. It is proposed that these assets be transferred to Guaracara refining, since they consist of reservoirs, a water treatment plant, and associated water infrastructure. Consequently, the vesting bill being debated today also provides for the transfer of those additional assets directly from Trintoc and Trintopec to Guaracara refining without the need to go to Petrotrin and then come to Guaracara refining. In addition to Trintoc and Trintopec, another company that is integral to the existing corporate structure of Petrotrin is Palo Seco Agricultural Enterprises, PSAEL. PSAEL, a former subsidiary of Trintopec, was incorporated in 1986. From inception to the mid-90s, the main focus of this company was agriculture. However, with the advent of Petrotrin in 1993 and the merger and vesting of the oil-related assets of Trintoc and Trintopec in Petrotrin, PSAEL's core function shifted to the provision of project management services to Petrotrin. PSAEL was thus made a wholly owned state enterprise in 2007 and continues to provide project management services to the state. PSAEL holds 3,725 acres of land on which Petrotrin currently undertakes exploration and production operations. Those lands are in Kura and Quarry and Palo Seco. In order to expedite the transfer of all of the exploration and production operations from Petrotrin to Heritage Petroleum, it is further proposed that those lands be directly vested in Heritage Petroleum from PSAEL through the vesting bill, rather than being transferred to Petrotrin and then back to the new Heritage Petroleum Company. I now come to the bill before us. It is in the context of all of this that we need to look at the clauses of the bill before the House. The bill has just 8 clauses, 6 schedules, and is organized in parts relating to Heritage Petroleum, Paria fuel trading, and Guaracara refining, respectively. Clause 1 is the short title and provides for the Act to be referred to as the Miscellaneous Provisions, Heritage Petroleum, Paria fuel trading, and Guaracara Refining Vesting Act 2018. Clause 2 provides for the interpretation of certain words and phrases, including definitions for the terms appointed day, E&P contracts, minister, and point-of-care refinery site. Clauses 1 and 2 together comprise Part 1 of the bill and address preliminary matters in the usual way. Part 2 of the bill is comprised of clauses 3 and 4 and provides for the transfer to and vesting of assets in the Heritage Petroleum Company Limited. Clause 3, subclause 1 of the bill, provides for all of the assets of Petrotrin relative to the exploration and production operations described in Schedule 1 to be transferred to and vested in Heritage Petroleum. Clause 3, subclause 2, will transfer and vest in Heritage Petroleum 3,725 acres of land consisting of 2 separate parcels, 1,829 acres in Kura and Quarry, and 1,896 acres in Palo Seco, more particularly described in Schedule 2 and now held by PSAEL. As mentioned, this transfer will allow Heritage Petroleum to continue the exploration and production operations currently undertaken by Petrotrin on the PSAEL lands. Clause 4 of the bill sets out the effect of the vesting of the assets in Heritage Petroleum and provides for Petrotrin's existing exploration and production contracts, as well as the contracts described in Schedule 3 of the bill, to be continued with Heritage Petroleum as a party instead and in place of Petrotrin, and further for Heritage Petroleum in all instances to be substituted for any reference in those contracts to Petrotrin. Therefore, Madam Speaker, clauses 3 and 4 will facilitate Heritage Petroleum on the appointed day, immediately carrying on with the exploration and production operations at present undertaken by Petrotrin, as it will become not only seized and possessed of all lands and oil fields used for exploration and production activities, but also Heritage Petroleum will become a party to all of the contracts, leases, licenses, and operatorships under which those exploration and production activities are now undertaken. Clause 5 is also in Part 3 of the bill and provides for the vesting of assets for the terminaling operations of Paria fuel trading. By virtue of Clause 5, all of the assets of Petrotrin relative to the terminaling operations described in Schedule 4 will be transferred to and vested in Paria fuel trading. Terminaling operations, Madam Speaker, for your information, refer to the midstream natural gas gathering, crude oil gathering, pipeline operations, transportation and storage facilities, and relate to certain activities undertaken at the Pointe-à-Pierre refinery. Schedule 4, which I will deal with in due course, sets out in greater detail the right, title, claim, or interest of Petrotrin in terminaling at the Pointe-à-Pierre refinery site that will now be taken over by Paria Fuel Trading Company. Part 4 of the bill, which provides for the vesting of certain assets essential to the intended business operations of Guaracara refining, is comprised of Clause 6. Pursuant to Clause 6, Subclause 1, all of the assets of Petrotrin relative to the refinery operations described in Schedule 5 will be transferred to and vested in Guaracara refining. Clause 6, Subclause 2, will provide for the assets of Trintoc and Trintopec described in Schedule 6 to be transferred to and vested in Guaracara refining. Those assets are the additional assets of Trintoc and Trintopec discussed earlier, namely reservoirs, a water treatment plant, and associated water infrastructure, which will now be transferred to Guaracara refining. As I indicated earlier, the refining company will not only hold the assets of the refinery, but will also provide utility services, electricity, water, and so on, to the other companies. The final part of the bill, Part 5, consists of Clauses 7 and 8 and addresses miscellaneous matters. Clause 7, the penultimate clause of the bill, provides for a waiver of stamp duty payable under the Stamp Duty Act, Chapter 7601, upon the transfer and vesting of the undertakings of Petrotrin, PSAEL, Trintoc, and Trintopec. It should be noted, Madam Speaker, that a similar waiver of stamp duty was also a feature of both the Petrotrin Vesting Act of the 1990s and the Trinidad and Tobago Oil Company Vesting Act of the 1980s. Clause 8 of the bill provides for the commencement of the Act on the first day of December 2018. Each of the 6 schedules to the bill group assets of similar classification corresponding with the company which is to be vested with those assets. As such, Schedules 1, 2, and 3 detail the assets to be vested in Heritage Petroleum. Schedule 1 sets out the property and rights comprising all of the assets of the exploration and production operations of Petrotrin. For example, Madam Speaker, it includes oil mining leases, production sharing contracts, pipeline and other licenses, onshore and offshore oil fields, the crude oil pipeline at the Pointe-à-Pierre refinery site, and shares in subsidiary companies that engage in exploration and production activities. So Schedule 1, Madam Speaker, details all of the assets required for exploration and production, which would now be vested in the Heritage Petroleum Company. Schedule 2 describes the PSAEL lands located in Kura and Quarry, shown shaded on a map marked Map A-1, and Palo Seco, shown and shaded on a map marked Map A-2. Schedule 3 lists 2 contracts related to water treatment in which Heritage Petroleum is to be substituted as a party instead of Petrotrin. Schedule 4 lists all of the assets, rights, and property to be transferred to Paria Fuel Trading from Petrotrin, specifically assets related to the terminaling operations of Petrotrin, and includes a portion of the Pointe-à-Pierre refinery, shown unshaded on a map marked Map B. The remaining Schedules 5 and 6 both relate to the assets to be transferred to Guaracara refinery. Schedule 5 sets out the particulars of the Pointe-à-Pierre refinery assets to be transferred to Guaracara refining, shown unshaded on a map marked Map C. Finally, Schedule 6 refers to the non-core assets of Trintoc and Trintopec, also to be transferred to Guaracara refining. Madam Speaker, there has been a lot of discussion in the public domain, Madam Speaker, about guarantees given by the government with respect to financing undertaken by Petrotrin. I have in my possession a list of all of the details of all of these letters of guarantee. I'll give an example. In July 2018, the government issued a letter of guarantee on behalf of Petrotrin to Republic Bank in the amount of US $50 million, together with First Caribbean. Again, in March 2018, the government issued a letter of guarantee to, First Caribbean is $50 million US, and Republic Bank is $50 million US. First in July, second in March of 2018. In August of 2018, the government issued, the Minister of Finance signed a letter of guarantee for Petrotrin, without which it would not have been able to function, in favor of Scotiabank in the amount of US $50 million. Again, in November 2018, just a few days ago, on the 9th, today is the 14th, so that's 5 days ago, the government issued a letter of guarantee, the Minister of Finance, in favor of Scotiabank in the amount of $50 million US. On the 27th of September 2018, the Minister of Finance issued a guarantee on behalf of Petrotrin in the amount of $55 million US to First Citizens Bank. On the 26th of October 2018, these are all very current dates, Madam Speaker, the Minister of Finance issued a guarantee in favor of Petrotrin to FCB in the amount of US $25 million. I say all of this, Madam Speaker, because the total guarantees issued just this year alone, $400 million US, or $402 million US. What I had not listed was a guarantee given to FCB on the 5th of November, $100 million US, and a guarantee given to Republic Bank on the 12th of October, $22 million US. $402 million US, over $2.5 billion Trinidad and Tobago dollars are the letters of guarantee signed by this Minister of Finance in this year, 2018 alone, because we did others before, in favor of Petrotrin. And Madam Speaker, $402 million US we have had to guarantee. $2.5 billion, $2.6 billion actually, in just between March 2018 and now. 6 months. In 6 months, we've had to issue guarantees in excess of $2.5 billion Trinidad and Tobago dollars. And every time we do this, Madam Speaker, it increases the public debt, because the public debt is comprised of direct debt and contingent liabilities. And a letter of guarantee for a state enterprise is a contingent liability. And this $402 million US became contingent liabilities, increased our public debt by over $2.5 billion in just 6 months, just to deal with this problem here, as the Attorney General is saying. It's more than 1%. The public debt is around 80. This is more than 1%. It's more like 3%, Madam Speaker. In one day, we had to approve $170 million increase in loan guarantees for Petrotrin. Otherwise, it could not survive. And that is just a short while ago. I'm not talking before, I'm talking this year, 2018, just a month ago. In one day, we had to increase the public debt and increase our debt to GDP ratio by 1% in one day because of the requirement to bail out Petrotrin, because it simply did not have the cash to function, Madam Speaker. And I say these things because I have heard stories outside there that the government, the Treasury, is not required to support Petrotrin, that Petrotrin is a financially viable company, that it is profitable, that it makes profit, and that it requires no assistance from the state. And I've read out all of this because it's very important that the public is aware of the true facts, Madam Speaker. The public needs to be aware of the true facts. At this point in time, the loans that Petrotrin is exposed to, in terms of short-term loans, the original amounts, the outstanding balance, let me use that. The outstanding balance to date in terms of short-term loans locally, $109 million. In terms of foreign loans, short-term loans, $644 million. In terms of the gasoline optimization project, long-term loans, $1.48 billion. In terms of the ultra-low sulfur diesel project and the gas optimization project, a further $5.76 billion. Madam Speaker, this is just part of the loan situation with Petrotrin, Madam Speaker. Petrotrin is also indebted to the government, or Petrotrin owes the government, or Petrotrin is just not paying the government, over $3 billion, close to $4 billion in supplementary petroleum tax, other petroleum taxes, and royalties. Almost $4 billion Trinidad and Tobago dollars. And you can understand, Madam Speaker, the company just can't pay. They just can't pay. Because if we have to guarantee $2.5 billion, or close to $3 billion in financing just for the last 6 months, if we had not done those guarantees, the company would have collapsed. So you can imagine they're in a situation where from day to day, they're struggling to pay bills. And the banks required the government to guarantee the loans. Otherwise, Petrotrin would not have been given facilities in terms of paying its wage bill, for example. That was the crisis that came at us just a month ago, that if we did not guarantee that $170 million, $1 billion, that they would not have been able to pay their wage bill for October and November, Madam Speaker. So these are the facts. This is the reality outside there. And while it is true that the government owes Petrotrin money for the fuel subsidy, the government has been required within the last week to make an arrangement as part of the restructuring of Petrotrin to pay $200 million, almost $1.4 billion, to agree to pay $1.4 billion to assist Petrotrin in securing financing as part payment for the fuel subsidy. You have to understand, Petrotrin owes the government almost $4 billion in unpaid taxes. The government owes Petrotrin over $1 billion. I think $1.7 billion is the number that I have heard in terms of the fuel subsidy. So the net owed to the government is in excess of $2 billion. But the government has agreed as part of the financing, because this is necessary, to give the payments totaling $200 million to deal with the restructuring and refinancing of Petrotrin's debt. So that's another $1.4 billion on top of the $2.5 billion. Otherwise, that would be the end of it. If this government had not agreed to provide that $200 million last week, that would be the end of it. The foreign financiers would refuse to finance Petrotrin. The entire process would simply collapse. So, Madam Speaker, to recap, what we are doing today is almost identical to what was done in the early 1990s when the assets of Trintoc and Trintopec were vested in the newly created Petrotrin. It's identical. When you look at the Petrotrin Vesting Act and you look at the Heritage and Paria Vesting Bill, it is the exact same approach. It is exact same terminology. So we are doing what has been done in this country. We are doing what was done in this country over 35 years ago. There's nothing new about this. This is standard practice. So I hope, Madam Speaker, I have explained what we're about, and I will answer any questions that members pose to me that require an explanation in my winding up. I beg to move, Madam Speaker.
Honourable members, I shall now propose the question for debate. The question is that a bill entitled An Act to Vest Certain Assets of Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited in the Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited, and the Guaracara Refining Company Limited, to vest certain assets of Trinidad and Tobago Oil Company Limited and Trinidad and Tobago Petroleum Company Limited in the Guaracara Refining Company Limited, and to vest Palaseco Agricultural Enterprise Limited lands in Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, be now read a second time. Member for Point of Pear.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to say before I start, welcome back. Madam Speaker, after listening to the Minister of Finance for 45 minutes on the issue about this bill that is before us and giving us a history about Petrotrin, I want to say this presentation by the Minister of Finance on this bill represents another chapter in the deception, manipulation, and secrecy that this government has perpetrated upon the people of our country with respect to what was the Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when I was coming into Parliament this just after lunch, it was bleak outside, raining. And I'm sure presently, right now, there are thousands of employees of Petrotrin who would be going home in the next couple of days, watching this debate here this afternoon, Madam Speaker, along with businesses and staff of those businesses that depended on Petrotrin and their life and their families, Madam Speaker. I am sure some of those workers that are looking on are crying. Some are feeling depressed after listening to the Minister of Finance. Some are feeling hopelessness. But there are some individuals, Madam Speaker, listening to the Minister of Finance is smiling based on what he presented here today. Names like Espine, the chairman of Petrotrin, he's smiling. Robert Riley, Ajoda Singh, and Wiley and Riley, Madam Speaker. But I'm sure because why are they smiling? They are smiling because they are seeing the execution of their plan and the destruction of Petrotrin coming to the forefront by the Minister of Finance. Madam Speaker, I am sure MPs like Point Forte, MPs like Labrie are not smiling because their communities, their constituents are being affected as we speak presently, along with San Fernando West and San Fernando East and Point of Pear, Madam Speaker. We have fence-line communities, Tabaquite, Gasparillo. There are people looking on this debate in awe based on what the Minister of Finance has presented here this afternoon. And it's really a deception that he has done this here this afternoon. He's trying to create a deception that this is nothing new, Madam Speaker. Yeah. That the Petroleum Vesting Act that he refers to is what he's doing here by this Vesting Act, this miscellaneous provision of the Heritage Petroleum, Paria, Fuel Trading, and Guaracara Refining Vesting Bill 2018, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it is also, I would use the word disingenuous by the Minister of Finance, how he talked about Petroleum, and it appears that Petroleum is useless. It never developed Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, I want to read in his budget statement, the Minister of Finance, 2018, on October the 2nd, 2017, presented by the Minister of Finance, on page 27. The category is Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago, better known as Petroleum. And I quote, Madam Speaker, the Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago, Petroleum, has been instrumental not only in generating resources for the financing, the growth and development of Trinidad and Tobago, but also in building for the country a capability in energy affairs, which was so critical during the transformation of our oil economy into a gas-based economy. This is what the Minister of Finance said in his budget statement. Right? Madam Speaker, it goes on page 27. Madam Speaker, and I quote, Madam Speaker, there is no doubt that Petroleum still has great potential, including an excellent portfolio of land and marine acreage. This the gentleman said so, Madam Speaker, the Minister of Finance. What happened 1 year later? 1 year later, approximately, Madam Speaker. And I sat with the Minister of Finance on an energy committee, and he always said glowing things about Petroleum, Madam Speaker. So what has happened? There are over 5,000 employees are about to go home in 2 weeks' time. Madam Speaker, and so he talked about also in his presentation government guarantees. But you know what is the ironic thing, Madam Speaker? For the last 6 months of 2018, he talked about the present government, this government, guaranteeing loans for Petroleum. Prior to that, Petroleum was able to secure their own loans based on the ability of Petroleum as a viable operation. What has happened in these 6 months that the government of Trinidad and Tobago now has to guarantee Petroleum loans? You know what has happened, Madam Speaker? What has happened is that the board of directors and this government perpetrated a narrative that Petroleum was no longer viable. They were shutting it down. They were sending home the workers, destroying the union, and that created an issue, a financing issue for Petroleum to survive in the last 6 months, Madam Speaker. So it is not because of Petroleum as a viable concern, a growing company, Madam Speaker. It is what the board of directors of Petroleum in the last 12 months, led by Chairman Espine, and this government has done to Petroleum and this country, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, listening to the Minister of Finance, you know, I want to refer to an article by one Mariano Brown that was carried by a news reporter, Rosemary Sant. Now, Mariano Brown was a member, or still is a member of the PNM. And his interview, and I quote, Madam Speaker, on the 10th of September, on a Morning Brew, he talked about Petroleum. This is a company with many moving parts. Mariano Brown is forecasting that a lot of mistakes will be made by this vesting bill. And while some may not be apparent to the public, the spillover effects of the mistakes that will be made will last for a few years. And this is like a roller coaster, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, Mariano Brown had issues with this vesting bill, just like how we have issues with this vesting bill, Madam Speaker. So it is not like for like, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I sat in quiet. I didn't disturb anyone. Madam Speaker, as the saying goes, it was like a thief in the night we come into this parliament. And this government has trusted upon us this bill that seeks to vest certain assets of Petroleum into 3 companies: the Heritage, Petroleum, the Paria fuel trading, and the Guaracara refining company, Madam Speaker. And they have now come today and said, well, there's a holding company, according to the Minister of Finance, Trinidad Petroleum Holding. So the holding company, Trinidad Petroleum, and you have these 4 subsidiaries to date: Petroleum Old, or as they would have said, Petroleum Legacy. You have the Heritage, you have the Paria, and you have the Guaracara refining. Madam Speaker, so that Petroleum now is a subsidiary of Trinidad Petroleum Limited, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my time today in my short debate will be spent exposing to the people of our country the lack of vision by this administration, Madam Speaker, led by the Honorable Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance. I will show how months after the announcement by Chairman Espinay that this refinery will be closed, how this government has no idea what to do in this country with the valuable assets of Petroleum, Madam Speaker. They want to take the most valuable assets, in my view, of Petroleum, of this country, that belong to you and I, Madam Speaker, the taxpayers, the workers that are being sent home, and transfer them into these 3 companies. So they are vesting the assets out of Petroleum, just the assets, into these 3 companies, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we are now told by the Minister of Finance who the shareholding would be, and it will roll up to the Trinidad Petroleum Holding Company. Madam Speaker, let me also say to the people of this country, the trade unions, that under UNC administration, we would never have shut down this refinery. We would have worked with the employees, which we had started to do, with the union in trying to make Petroleum viable once again. Madam Speaker, my heart hurts as a member for Point-a-Pierre, because on a daily basis, people come to my office seeking solace, seeking comfort of what to do, Madam Speaker. The decision to close this refinery will be seen for what it really is, Madam Speaker. I call it a cowardly and perpetrated upon this country of our people, Madam Speaker. Don't worry about if I have to read it.
Madam Speaker, we listen attentively to that.
Honourable members, you all might be aware of it, but the volume of the crosstalk is becoming a bit difficult for me to follow the contribution from the member of Point-a-Pierre. So please check your volumes. Member for Point-a-Pierre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, a few months ago, the Prime Minister came into Marabella to have a meeting. And he talked about the closure of the refinery. And he talked about it was a brave and courageous act that he's taken in closing the refinery. And he also said that history will vindicate him. But as I say, Madam Speaker, to the people of this country will never forgive the Prime Minister for closing down Petroleum. So, Madam Speaker, let me get into my crux of my presentation here. Madam Speaker, this bill here has 8 clauses. 6 schedules. And you know, I listened since I've been here to the Attorney General when he's reading out or piloting a bill. And he starts off with a short title. Short title in this bill, Madam Speaker, is 1. This act may be cited as a miscellaneous provision, in brackets, Heritage Petroleum, Paria Fuel Trading, and Guaracara Refining Investing Act 2018. 1 sentence, Madam Speaker, but it is a powerful sentence. That is what is, by these 3 companies, by this clause 1, Madam Speaker, it is changing the whole shape of this country when it comes to Petroleum, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when you go down into the different clauses, but you know what is, and I just want to lay it in my presentation at the offset. When you look at the preamble, Madam Speaker, on which I think the Minister of Finance did not really get into the preamble. And when you read the preamble, Madam Speaker, I think it's paragraph 9, and I'll read, and whereas pursuant to Section 6 of the Petroleum Investing Act, Chapter 6207, the Minister may by order transfer and invest in Petroleum the assets of any of them, which was set out in the 2nd schedule of the Petroleum Investing Act, Chapter 6207, the 2nd schedule assets. And its next paragraph is, and whereas such order has not been completed, and whereas it is expedient to vest certain of the 2nd schedule assets in Guaracara Refining in a manner herein after set forth, Madam Speaker. I will come back to those 3 preamble clauses, paragraphs, Madam Speaker, as I go on, because it really relates to the Petroleum Investing Act, and I will make note of that, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, who this bill is really trying to satisfy in passing this bill, Madam Speaker? When this government came into power, they talked about fixing Petroleum, Madam Speaker. They referred Petroleum to a committee called a Lashley Committee, a Petroleum Committee, Madam Speaker. And out of that committee, this present board took certain decisions coming out of that Lashley Committee report and other reports that, as the Minister of Finance said, experts. So you had the Solomon and you had the McKinsey report. And when you look at the Lashley report, Madam Speaker, that was part of one of the documents, or several documents, that triggered the decision by the board of directors and to the government in restructuring Petroleum in these new entities, Madam Speaker. And when you look at it on page 42 of the Lashley report, Madam Speaker, page 42, Appendix 8, the appendix, the matrix is the Petroleum's strengths, opportunities, critical issues, and weaknesses, Madam Speaker. When you look at the strengths under the Lashley report of Petroleum, the opportunities of Petroleum, and then you have the critical issues and weaknesses of Petroleum, Madam Speaker, the strengths and the opportunities together outweigh the critical issues and the weaknesses. So it is great concern that this government is taking the decision of closing down Petroleum, mothballing Petroleum, sending home all the workers, Madam Speaker, and creating these new entities free of liability, free of debt, employing new employees, Madam Speaker, and not taking into account the real strengths and opportunities under the Lashley report, because the Lashley report, once again, never talked about the closure of Petroleum. So, Madam Speaker, even in the critical issues in this report, what would change with these new entities? What would change in respect to corporate governance and poor decision making? Is it because they now hire a fellow called Wiley that he will make better decisions? Expensive decisions. They talked about critical issues, transparency and accountability, Madam Speaker. Are we getting better transparency and accountability in these new 3 entities? I ask. They talked about procurement issues. Are we getting better procurement issues under these 3 new companies?
Very good. Good point.
The strengths, Madam Speaker, under this report as Petrotrin, large land and marine acreage. Who is getting that? The strengths of Petrotrin, regional market share. They talked about that. Integrated upstream and downstream operations as a strength, Madam Speaker. Petrotrin as a strength, workforce, skills, expertise, and opportunity for continuous improvement. That was a strength of Petrotrin. Their workforce, what they are doing, they send home everybody. Their strength. This is not the opposition saying that. This is people that they got involved, they hired. Another strength for Petrotrin under the Lashley Committee, which SPNA was part of, capability to address and resolve production incidents. And that's because of the skilled workforce. What is now becoming of that? Opportunities, Madam Speaker, under Petrotrin. Opportunities, Madam Speaker. They talked about increased exploration, extraction of hydrocarbons, oil production as an opportunity to acquire competencies through equity partner in new generation techniques to explore existing acreage in deep waters. Opportunity again, stabilize governance and management. Another opportunity, improve refinery performance. Another opportunity, improve operational efficiency and reduce costs. So, Madam Speaker, when you look at all these strengths and opportunities that Petrotrin had in the last 8 months, what happened 8 months later? What happened? What happened is that this government wanted to close down Petrotrin just like that, Madam Speaker. They wanted to destroy the unions.
Correct.
And they are building it for somebody to get. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we are seeing 3 new companies that is formed. Assets are being, valuable assets are being transferred out of Petrotrin. And no liabilities are coming with these companies. Now, when the Minister of Finance talked about, referred to the Petrotrin Investing Act. In the Petrotrin Investing Act, he did, the Minister of Finance is not like for like. Page 9 of the Petrotrin Investing Act, Part 2. Liabilities and this is the assets of Trintoc and Trintopec coming into Petrotrin back then in 1993, Madam Speaker. Part 2 of that Vesting Act talked about heading liabilities and obligations assumed. All liabilities except the tax liabilities of Trintoc and Trintopec, obligations, debts, encumbrances incurred, undertaken, assumed, or accepted by Trintoc and Trintopec to the extent outstanding immediately prior to the appointed day and recorded in the books as at the appointed day. What that meant, Madam Speaker, from reading this, is that in this Petrotrin Investing Act, all the liabilities and the assets under Trintoc and Trintopec came under this new Petrotrin Investing Act. What this government is doing, the Minister of Finance, is hiving off just critical assets of Petrotrin, placing it in these 3 companies, and the debt of Petrotrin, the liabilities, stays within old Petrotrin, Madam Speaker. So who becomes responsible for that debt? What are the issues in respect to even the guarantees of Petrotrin when these debts were incurred? They might have been incurred based on the assets of Petrotrin, Madam Speaker. So now you hive off the assets alone, put it in these 3 new companies with no liabilities, but the liabilities stay within Petrotrin. So for example, Madam Speaker, contractors who have liability with, receivables with Petrotrin, would they get paid? Would they be paid? Or when will they be paid, Madam Speaker? What is their recourse, Madam Speaker? Vendors, what is the recourse to them? There are businesses that are dependent on Petroleum, Madam Speaker, and they are in jeopardy of closure because Petroleum might still owe them money. And I want to refer to an article in the Energy Chamber website, Madam Speaker, where a survey was done. A survey was done to the businesses within the Energy Chamber. And a survey was done, businesses that depended on Petroleum, and what percentage of their businesses depended on Petroleum. And at the end of it, Madam Speaker, what came out of that survey was that there are certain businesses that are dependent, 25 to 30% of their business depends on the Petroleum, and they would be in jeopardy of closure, sending home employees, Madam Speaker. And also their concern is they don't know if they will be paid, the debts will be paid to the association members, Madam Speaker. So we asked about these outstanding debts, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we talked about the guarantee of the outstanding bonds. These bullet payments of 2019 and 2022. In the original bond issue, I am sure it would have been guaranteed by Petroleum. Now you have stripped away Petroleum assets and put them into 3 different companies. What is the issue? What becomes of that guarantee now? I heard the Minister of Finance talked about, you know, they're working with a consortium to refinance these bonds and so forth, Madam Speaker. You know, the jury is still out on that. What about the retrenchment? You talked about the closure, the shutdown of Petroleum, man. The retrenchment and enumeration packages of these thousands of workers, Madam Speaker. Right now I have some letters where you have an individual, an employee, who's going home in 2 weeks' time. He gave 25 odd years to Petroleum. In the last 6 years or so, Madam Speaker, he became permanent. So prior to the 19 years, he was considered temporary. He got a letter of a severance package for only taking into consideration his last 6 years. Then I have another letter, Madam Speaker, where a temporary worker has gotten a letter from Petroleum saying he has only been working there for 4 years, but he will be paid some severance. And the question I have to ask, are all workers, whether temporary, permanent, are they getting a severance package to go home, Madam Speaker? Because when early on, in a few weeks running up to today, we heard about enhanced severance packages for workers. We heard, I think my colleague in another place had asked a question directly to the Minister of Energy, and the Minister of Energy said that all workers, whether temporary or permanent, would have been going home with a severance package, man. So I asked the Minister of Finance to give some clarity to the workers of Petroleum, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, money owed to Petroleum. You see, this vesting bill that is before us today, Madam Speaker, with these 8 clauses, really needs a lot of clarity, further clarity. And it's not something as very simple as the Minister of Finance is trying to make it out to be, that we have done this before with the Petroleum vesting bill, Madam Speaker. You see, the confusion that is created by a lot of these companies, and this government likes to open companies, Madam Speaker. They love companies. So they have opened these new companies. And I asked a question, money that might be owed to Petroleum, given the confusion that is being created by this government with these different companies, would Petroleum be able to collect these outstanding funds owed to Petroleum? These are questions I ask because the minister asks him questions, so I'm asking him questions. Madam Speaker, I want to refer to something with Petroleum, the closure of Petroleum, the Naikwan plant. Because a few months ago, we were here in Parliament, and we were told that the Naikwan plant, or the WGTL, was sold to Naikwan. And coming out of that deal, Madam Speaker, and Petroleum was still there, certain products that would be produced, well, first of all, Nikon was sold for $35 million by this government. The WGTL was sold for $35 million US by this government. An initial payment of $10 million US and preference shares valued at $25 million US to be paid in 2 tranches. I asked, what will become of that? Is Petroleum going to collect that? Is the government and the taxpayers going to collect that? The other aspect of the Nikon, the WTL to Nikon deal, Madam Speaker, is that the agreement was for the purchase of the diesel produced from the plant by Petroleum. Will this deal still exist, Madam Speaker? And there's also an aspect of preferential gas coming to the Nikon plant, a preferential gas contract via Petroleum. I asked, what is becoming of that? I also asked, the minister mentioned in his speech, in his debate, about the ultra-low sulfur diesel plant. Is this plant now mothballed and it's going to be sold out for pennies on the dollar, just like the Nikon, like WTL, Madam Speaker? I asked these questions. Madam Speaker, we have 3 new companies that are mentioned, 4 mentioned today. So I don't know if the holding company has been formed and registered October the 5th. I want to ask, Madam Speaker, who are the directors of these companies? What are the remuneration packages of these directors? Right? Are we now going to see 3 CEOs like Mr. Wiley, who's hired for Heritage and is getting over $245,000 a month?
Honourable Member, for point of order, your original speaking time is now spent. You're entitled to 15 more minutes, if you wish, to complete your contribution.
Thank you, Madam.
You may proceed.
Yes, Madam Speaker. So I asked about these 3 new companies, 4 companies, because the holding company must have a CEO, must have somebody to report to. So you have 4 companies so far, 4 CEOs, 4 sets of administration, 4 sets of management, 4 sets of employees, Madam Speaker. At what price, Madam Speaker? So when they talked about trying to be cost-benefit analysis of shutting down Petroleum, you have now created 4 companies with 4 separate sort entities that require 4 sets of employees to make those companies viable, profitable, and efficient, according to the Minister of Finance. So I ask this question, what is the price to the taxpayer, Madam Speaker? What is the... Even the employment procedure, Madam Speaker, is a secrecy. I asked the Honourable Prime Minister here last week, Friday, about a CEO who was hired. The Prime Minister mentioned Mr. Wiley was hired in August for the Heritage Petroleum Company. But the Heritage Company was not formed until October the 5th. So I don't know which company Mr. Wiley was employed by. Was he employed by Petroleum for temporary 2 months or 3 months until the Heritage Company was formed in October? Right. So, Madam Speaker, you'll tell us. You'll tell us. So, is there another Wiley number 2 coming on for the Paria?
Already here.
At 245, and also the Guaracara refinery? Madam Speaker, I don't know. I asked because the Minister of Finance said ask him questions. Madam Speaker, we just had a new U.S. ambassador, United States ambassador, Mr. Joseph Mondello. And on, one of his concerns, he talked about, and I want to quote Mr. Mondello, at a meeting at the Hyatt on October 25th, at an Amchan TT meeting. You know, he talked about his point when he was given his discussion about investors coming into Trinidad and what they're looking for. They're looking for transparency, stability, and predictability. This is the new U.S. ambassador. And I am asking, the way this government is going ahead with Petroleum and these new companies, it goes against transparency, it goes against lack of stability and predictability, because it's all shrouded in secrecy, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I know I don't have much more time, but I want to go back to the preamble, Madam Speaker. And the preamble in paragraph of the bill, in paragraph 9, where we talked about the Petroleum Investing Act. And the next paragraph, whereas such order has not been completed, and whereas it is expedient to vest certain of the second schedule assets in Guaracara refining in the manner herein after set forth. Madam Speaker, let me go to the Petroleum Investing Bill Schedule 2. Second schedule, where the assets of Trintoc and Trintopec. And I asked for an explanation with the preamble, whereas such order has not been completed. Madam Speaker, in the second schedule exception, the real estate holdings of Trintoc and Trintopec. You know, I want to list some of these real estate holdings, Madam Speaker. A, Pointe-a-Pierre residential area and buildings. Pointe-a-Pierre residential area and buildings. Pointe-a-Pierre refinery has prime real estate, prime residential houses, Madam Speaker, and buildings. B, all clubs and recreational facilities. C, Brighton residential area and buildings. So Brighton has residential compounds, houses. D, it's interesting, D, I did not even know that. Residences at number 22 and 24 Collins Road, Marval, Port of Spain. That is a prime affluent residential area in Marval, Madam Speaker. This is part of this schedule. Beach Camp, Palo Seco residential area and buildings. F, Forest Reserve residential area and buildings. G, Point Forte residential area and buildings. I think Point Forte residential, we had a member on that side, I think a Minister of Trade, we had to try and get her out from the Point Forte residential area, Madam Speaker. She's still there. Also in that schedule, Madam Speaker, it talked about shares of Lake Asphalt of Trinidad and Tobago 1978 Limited, and 4, a urea formaldehyde concentrate plant, Point Lisas. I asked, what is this? And number 5, a O2N2 plant, Point Lisas. Now, Madam Speaker, the preamble says, whereas such order has not been completed. From my information, talking to a lawyer, that the Minister of Finance could come at any time and vest these same assets that I called out here in Guaracara, pass a legal notice, and we will be none the wiser. And I don't know, I want to carry it further. I don't know if these things could be sold to whoever, John Public, without the Parliament knowing about these assets being sold, Madam Speaker. I ask. Madam Speaker, Clause 4 of this bill talks about, subject to Section 3, the effect of vesting the assets shall be from the appointed EMP contracts. Madam Speaker, it talks about the effects of vesting assets into the Heritage Petroleum based on Schedule 3. Now, Madam Speaker, I don't understand why the Minister of Finance only listed contracts for A and B. One is a water treatment plant agreement between Petroleum and TN Ramnat, and B, a deed of lease dated 12th October, and a deed variation. Why he took that opportunity to only list those 2 contracts, Madam Speaker, but it also talked about all E&P contracts coming to Heritage. Madam Speaker, being disturbed.
It appears you're being disturbed from your own side. Please continue, member for point of view.
Madam Speaker, so I am asking that this Minister of Finance could please give us an entire listing of the contracts that are coming over E&P to the heritage, please, for clarity, because we don't trust them. Madam Speaker, you could put it in writing and send it. Madam Speaker, what is the role of National Petroleum now that we have a Paria fuel trading? What will become of National Petroleum? Because National Petroleum, presently, Petroleum used to refine the products, they sell it to National Petroleum, and they would distribute and market it. Is that going to be maintained? Because, or is it going to be a duplication? Because I ask, is NP now on the chopping block for closure? And the staff, I ask.
Long time.
Madam Speaker,
Good for them.
I talked about local talent versus international personnel. We see we have recruited, the government has recruited an international Mr. Wiley. I don't know any more international employees who will be coming on board, expats as we call them, because there are so many locals that are part of the energy sector internationally. Why don't we reach out to them and try to bring them back home, that pool of talent, to help this country? That is true patriotism, Madam Speaker. That is what we are hiring and recruiting foreign international players to come and make our companies, our local companies, our homegrown companies viable and profitable, Madam Speaker. We are asking them to do that. And I am saying there's enough local talent internationally. I mean, my colleague, Mr. Charles' son, is out there internationally. Give the local people a chance to come back home and produce for the country. That is true patriotism. That is true patriotism. But you know what is interesting, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, how much more time I have?
Your time expires at 3:01:35.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, Baruka Maloney is playing with me here this evening. You know, Madam Speaker, there's a song by Bon Jovi. I know you would know it. It's a line in it. The more things change, the more they remain the same. And this is what is happening here today, Madam Speaker. You know, nothing has changed with this new, it is just, I call it lipstick and rouge, Madam Speaker. Lipstick and rouge. Lipstick and rouge. You know, Madam Speaker, why is Aruka Maloney? I must be doing good work here today, you know, Madam Speaker. I'm really doing good work. Madam Speaker, you know, Petroleum, this government always like to talk about us on this side, you know, doing something wrong. Petroleum, Madam Speaker, is a company. There's a company called Petroleum Employee Assistance Program Services Limited. The CEO of that company, hired by this government in June 20, is Neil Parsanlal. Neil Parsanlal used to be a member of Parliament for the government under the Manning administration. I am not saying that he can't work, you know. I am saying that it is about friends and family, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, because, no, what I'm trying, where am I going with this? Where am I going with this, Madam Speaker, is that Petroleum is a company, Petroleum is a company, an energy company. Petroleum has set up a company called Petroleum Employees Assistance Program Services Limited, a EAP program. It's a company that, in theory, it's supposed to assist the welfare and well-being of the Petroleum employees. So I'm asking that same company headed by Neil Parsanlal, what is he doing, that company, if it's still in existence? How are they assisting the workers that they have terminated and going home? What counseling are they giving to these workers, Madam Speaker? So, Madam Speaker, you know, that company itself was set up to be a profit company so that this company has to go out on the market and be a employee assistance program company. That has nothing to do with the business of the energy of Petroleum, Madam Speaker. It's about friends and family, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, you know, I did something as part of this debate on my social media. I asked and I solicit comments from my constituents out there. And it'll be interesting to hear the kind of comments, Madam Speaker. And you know, one of the majority comments saying to the opposition, to me, do not support this bill. It is detrimental to the people and the workers of Petroleum, Madam Speaker. No, I don't do those things. Madam Speaker, I wouldn't bother to read it out, but it's about that. So, Madam Speaker, with the few remaining time that I have my closing remarks, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as I close, I wonder if the Honorable Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance have spared a thought for the families that will have no income or their income taken away 1 month before Christmas. I wonder if this Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister could understand families who would be on the breadline, not able to send their children to school and university, to be able to pay their loans, Madam Speaker, to buy food. Madam Speaker, this has demonstrated that this government, led by the Honorable Prime Minister, is truly, I don't want to use these words, right, but uncaring, heartless administration. Some people might say even wicked, Madam Speaker. Wicked. I call on this government to really hold your hand and do the right thing for the people of Trinidad and Tobago with the Petroleum and the employees, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I call on them to rethink what they are doing. Madam Speaker, as I close, you know what I will say, Madam Speaker? When they are done with Petroleum, it won't be a legacy company. It won't be what we understood Petroleum to be. It will be simply a part of our history and the destruction of the citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, with those few words, I thank you.
Member for Port of Spain, North St. Anne's West.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I join this debate here today and start by assuring the people of Trinidad and Tobago that what they're seeing here today is one of the results of over 2 years of meticulous, strategic work, planning, the end product of expert advice and a government that at no point in time did it advise itself, but rather a government that at all points in time went for best-in-class advice. And it is precisely to save the people of Trinidad and Tobago and to ensure that the future economic realities of Trinidad and Tobago remain as they should be. Madam Speaker, we've heard in the public domain quite a lot of talk about union busting and about attacks on the union by this administration. And I'd like to start, Madam Speaker, if you would permit me, to say that as part of this administration, I can say without any hesitation or any fear of being contradicted that at no point in time has this administration engaged in any union busting, and in particular, any victimization or any attack on the OWTU. You see, Madam Speaker, what persons may not know is that prior to getting into politics and coming into this House and being elected by the people, for which I am grateful, I was one of the main advocate attorneys for the unions, including OWTU. And I'd like to take this opportunity to take persons back to late 2014, beginning of 2015, when the PG, Comrade Roger, came to me at that stage and informed me of a plot by the then government to fire him from Trinma, completely in breach of all industrial relations practice. And that attack was being led by the top of the then administration. And that is what union busting is. Immediately, Madam Speaker, as his advocate attorney, we managed to prevent him from being fired for Trinma. What then happened in this very house, with someone very different sitting in the chair that you now sit in, Madam Speaker, was a personal attack on Comrade Roger by the honorable member for Paria, coming one Friday afternoon and attacking him. You remember that? Coming one Friday afternoon and saying that someone had lost his life due to the gross negligence of Comrade Roger.
Correct.
Again, as the advocate attorney, we wrote to the then speaker asking that the record be corrected, providing the documentation, and unfortunately the public never heard what was said by Comrade Roger in this house. It was never read, it was never accepted. And I take this opportunity now to tell the people two things. That is union busting, because it's an attack on the head of one of the major trade unions personally. And what I can stand and say now is Ansel Roger was not fired from Trinma, nor was that personal attack on him there any veracity or any truth in it whatsoever. And today I correct the record on his behalf. Madam Speaker, Petrotrin, when we came in as an administration, one of the first things that was done was the setting up and the populating of the Energy Standing Committee, a sub-cabinet committee to deal with energy-related issues, and recognizing early o'clock as an administration that there were two entities in the energy industry, state entities that required immediate attention, the National Gas Company and the Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago. Those boards were appointed early in this administration's term, I believe by October 2015. We then requested at the Energy Standing Committee that Petrotrin's management and board come and do a presentation to that committee on the state of the company, because by then the population knew that there were two very large bonds that would become due in a short period of time. The first bond of $850 million becoming due by a bullet payment in 2019, and the second in 2022, a bullet payment of $750 million US. What happened at that standing committee meeting was nothing short of shocking. And I can tell the people of Trinidad and Tobago here today, Madam Speaker, that when the presentation was done by the management of Petrotrin to the committee, and they told us the shocking state of the company, how indebted it was, over $12 billion in debt, how its revenue had dropped, the amount of workers that were there, the drop in production, the state of the refinery and the assets. It was a very, very frightening picture that was painted to us. And then the room fell into dead silence at the end of the presentation, because we, the members of the committee, were waiting on the Petrotrin management to then move to part two of the presentation and to tell us what were the proposed solutions, Madam Speaker. And I will never forget, as a member of that committee, the deafening silence that fell. And then the chairman of the committee, the Honorable Prime Minister, asking Petrotrin, okay, we understand the state of the company, the effects it can have on our economy as Trinidad and Tobago. What next? Just like this, deafening silence. Not a single proposal, not a single plan as to how Petrotrin could be turned around. But we as an administration did not have the luxury of time. We as an administration, doing a quick assessment, knew how detrimental the state of Petrotrin was and the effects it would have on the whole economy of Trinidad and Tobago. Because you see, Madam Speaker, as a state entity, it carried the single largest debt portfolio in the whole state sector and enterprise. And there was no hope on the horizon of it turning itself around. So all of the figments of imagination, all of the lies, all of the untruths being spoken out there, Madam Speaker, about what Petrotrin means and what Petrotrin could have done. Separate the emotion, Madam Speaker. And what the analysis said at that state in time is if something drastic was not done to turn Petrotrin around, including dealing with the integrity of its assets, which at any moment could have led to the most horrific of environmental explosions, etc., something drastic was going to happen to Trinidad and Tobago, including the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. That was in 2016, Madam Speaker. Immediately, $12 billion in debt. They told us we then faced the next big issue with Petrotrin. They came to write off $4 billion in accrued losses. So over a period of time, they had accumulated over $4 billion in losses. And as we began to examine Petrotrin, the auditors came forward and said, you have to write off $4 billion in debt without the government being in a position to inject on the opposite side as capital equity $4 billion to prop it up. So immediately a disappearance from the books of Petrotrin of $4 billion in their asset and liability base. That, Madam Speaker, is the crisis that this country was facing at the time. What then happens? And they talk about union busting, they talk about the attack on the union. I would like to remind the country and the workers that in the period prior to 2015, in the middle of negotiations, when that administration was settling and burdening and saddling the country with further debt negotiations, they told the workers of Petrotrin and all workers who were represented by the OWTU at a time when the country could have afforded it, arguably, others getting 14% cumulatively over a period of time, Petrotrin workers were offered by that administration, those on the other side, 0, 0, 0. 0, 0, 0 is what those on the other side offered the Petrotrin workers at a time when they had revenue, at a time when they had money. That is what they left them with. Put it in the industrial court. Immediately what happens, and it culminated in December 2016, Madam Speaker, is the threat of a strike. And when we did the analysis, initially the board of Petrotrin and the management came to us to say they could not afford any increase in wages for the workers of Petrotrin at that time. And I recall it vividly, Madam Speaker, because at the time, at all hours of the day and night, there were conversations taking place with the Honorable Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, and myself, because I had a relationship and have a relationship with the OWTU at that time. So in speaking to them and trying to do what was necessary, not for Petrotrin alone, but for the country, there were discussions taking place with a looming strike, and the union reminding us of what had happened to them under the former administration of 0, 0, 0, when they gave other unions 14% and upwards. So, Madam Speaker, what then took place when we looked at the figures and the Minister of Finance and the Ministry of Finance looked at the figures with Petrotrin and realized it was almost impossible to afford the increases. At the last minute, when we were prepared to let the matter go to a strike, the Honorable Prime Minister intervened and he said it is wrong for those workers to have been given 0, 0, 0 when others got 14%. What can we really afford? And at the time, the Minister of Finance, with the technocrats at the Ministry of Finance, crunched it and said, we could barely afford a 3%, maybe a 5%. And the Prime Minister said offer 5% as an interim, because it is wrong for them to get 0.00. And that is what this administration did at a time when it was very difficult to afford. Furthermore, the instructions given at that stage to Petrotrin were offer 113, because financially that would have been the most affordable package put forward. And I remember the call late that afternoon, around 4 o'clock, from the management and the board. The union have accepted the 5%. And when we asked the question, the 113, you know what we were told, Madam Speaker? No. 320, right. 0 to be decided. And that is what the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago took on for the workers. And just to remind the country through you, Madam Speaker, the industrial court dealing with the live matter before it decided, when they heard all of the evidence of the financial state of Petrotrin, in a landmark decision, awarded the union 1% for that final year. So the industrial court ruled as an independent tribunal, hearing the financial state of Petrotrin at the time, that all the country could afford, because it is the country and the taxpayers who own Petrotrin, was an additional 1% for that period. Madam Speaker, that is not evidence of any victimization and any personalized attack on the PG of a trade union or on the workers of Petrotrin. And I can tell you further, Madam Speaker, that throughout, since we came in as an administration, there were a number of meetings held between the Honorable Prime Minister, some of his ministers, and the leadership of the OWTU. Because I sat in the vast majority of those meetings with the Prime Minister. And we listened, and the unions, not only the OWTU, came to the Prime Minister when they wrote, and he had meetings with them, and told him of the difficulties they face, the effects of the 0.00 that they were offered by the former administration, etc. And we always tried to find ways that it could be dealt with. But Madam Speaker, the difference with this administration, and I need the taxpayers and the citizens to understand, the difference in how we dealt with it was not in an irresponsible manner, but we dealt with it in a manner that the burden to the taxpayers was one that they could bear. So it was not just go out and give 14%, and then that meant an extra $5 billion added to expenditure for the year. We sat with the unions, the Ministry of Finance sat with the entities and worked out what could be afforded in very difficult times. Coming out of that, where we averted that strike in December 2016, Madam Speaker, the population at the time was signaling that perhaps the strike should have been allowed to go on, because the population had begun to understand the albatross that was around its neck. And for the first time in the history of an independent Trinidad and Tobago, the Prime Minister did an address to the nation in January 2017, solely and wholly on the state of Petrotrin. Coming out of the aversion of the strike, the Prime Minister then presented the facts to the population of Trinidad and Tobago and the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago on the state of Petrotrin in 2017. And recognizing the stranglehold that Petrotrin had on the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and how its $12 to $13 billion in debt was affecting Trinidad and Tobago in 2016-2017. The journey began at that stage, with the government recognizing that it had a responsibility and a duty to the future generations of Trinidad and Tobago to deal with this issue. The can that had been kicked down the road for many years before. It fell to this administration to do what is right for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, whilst balancing the fact that there were 3,000 permanent workers, and when you add casuals, temporaries, and contractors, maybe as much as 5,000. But looking at the financial state of Trinidad and Tobago, as an administration, you had to take a decision. Do you continue this? And I will get to why we couldn't continue it. and what it is that was done. At that time, Madam Speaker, if you'd allow me just to put some facts on the Hansard, revenue of Petrotrin had declined from US $5.5 billion in 2012 to $2.4 billion in 2016. From $5.5 billion to $2.4 billion. But of course, the expenditure hadn't decreased, but the revenue had dropped by more than half. They were owing tax and royalty even at that stage. I've heard it bandied about in a most irresponsible manner by persons in the public domain who should know better. The truth is, by then, in 2016, Petrotrin was already owing over $390 million US in tax and royalty, and that figure has only climbed. The total liabilities of Petrotrin in the accounts of 2016 to 2017, Madam Speaker, when we had to deal with this, the total liabilities were US $4.3 billion, over $21 billion, $25 billion in liabilities at Petrotrin. And I just described a drop in revenue from 5.5 billion US to 2.4 billion. It was a disaster waiting to happen, unfortunately. And as an administration, we had to take the decision, do we leave this for future generation, or do we deal with it now? But as fate would have it, Madam Speaker, we did not have that luxury. Because what was also happening with the looming bullet payments, the cabinet took a decision at that stage to appoint a specialist committee headed and chaired by the then permanent secretary in the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, the Selwyn Lashley Committee. And what did we do? Again, led by the Prime Minister, invited the union to put participants to nominate 2 persons onto that committee. And the union did so. Mr. David Abdullah and Mr. Marchand served on that committee. We pressured them, come with some recommendations. Despite all that you would hear, Madam Speaker, they did not make specific recommendations, but what they did is alert the country via that Lashley report to the dire state of Petrotrin when they reported on June 6, 2017. Immediately, when we had digested the report, we had met with the Lashley Committee, they had presented, we had started to discuss with other experts, what could we do to save Petrotrin? Could we improve the asset integrity? What do we do with the refinery? We have E&P, but no drilling was being done. There were no rigs in use. What use is an oil company that is not drilling for oil, Madam Speaker? There was no exploration and production being done on a successful scale, and that is the lifeblood. The refinery was losing money. And in addition to the refinery losing money, Madam Speaker, the asset integrity was of great concern. A new board was appointed in 2017. And Madam Speaker, at this point, I'd like to put on record that I've observed a most distasteful habit being formed. And that is the personalized, and I've said it before, the personalization and the personal attacks by those on the other side on persons who have come forward to serve Trinidad and Tobago. Yeah. They tried it the other day by calling names of persons saying they awarded contracts, which was not true for Marina and Tobago. They continue today. They think that by personalizing and calling names of persons who are not accused of any wrongdoing, the only names called by this side are those who there's evidence of wrongdoing taken place. Why we had to address it, something called a sovereign downgrade. In April 2017, Madam Speaker, to remind the population of Trinidad and Tobago, this country suffered sovereign downgrades by Standard & Poor's and Moody's. And the single largest item they focused on was the state of Petrotrin. And they basically told the country, if you don't fix Petrotrin, your rating is going to continue to decline. And just to let the population of Trinidad and Tobago know what that downgrade meant, one example. With the borrowings and the sovereign borrowings of Trinidad and Tobago, there's sometimes things called cross default. And when you have a downgrade in rating, it allows the the loan, the person who's given the loan, to call in the loan. That is exactly what happened. A Japanese bank wrote to the Ministry of Finance, triggered the clause that says you've suffered a sovereign downgrade. We want $200 million in 7 days. Fortunately, we were able to negotiate it, I think, between 10 and 14 days, and we had to find $200 million. Otherwise, it would have triggered a default, and what that would have then meant, Madam Speaker, and the population of Trinidad and Tobago, across default on sovereign borrowings of $120 billion. That is how serious this was, solely based on a downgrade because of the state of Petrotrin. So as an administration that is responsible, we had to deal with it. A board was appointed in September 2017, and rather than the criticism that I've heard from the other side, they should actually be applauded for having the wherewithal, the experience, standing strong in the face of adversity and doing the right thing. And what did they do? They went and hired the best in class, Solomon, McKinsey, and started analyzing it. And you know what they discovered? That the information being provided by management was questionable. How do you operate with your management information being questionable? And they kept reporting, and I put it on the record, Madam Speaker, at every stage, the board came and reported to a subcommittee of cabinet, sometimes chaired by the Prime Minister. And they were providing us with the information as we went along, and the options, and it is evolving, it's unfolding. I put on the record as well, there has been no decision to shut down Petrotrin. They continue to say so. And we will come soon to the structure, the new structure. This new structure and the restructuring of Petrotrin took almost 18 months. And it wasn't because we were wasting valuable time. It is because every time the board came to us with certain proposals, they were then asked to go and look at this. Because what the government did, and I want the workers of Petrotrin and the population to understand at this stage, the government did not accept when they came the first time and said you have to shut down certain aspects of Petrotrin, because the government recognized the effects that would have on the workforce. And we kept pushing them back and telling them, go back to the experts, see if you could tweak this, if you could tweak that, can you joint venture? But the truth is the refinery was a loss-making entity, and the amount of money, $25 billion, needed to be invested in the refinery. Where is the country getting $25 billion at this stage to invest into the refinery to turn it around? So, Madam Speaker, that is what we were facing. The board of Petrotrin did their work. They got best-in-class advisors. They kept coming to the government. We had discussions, and eventually it came down. We looked at all of the alternatives. Eventually it came down to the E&P, the exploration and production side, could be made profitable once you invest your capital in that and you manage to drill for oil and sell it. And again, another falsity, a distortion of reality we heard, was it being suggested that you could not sell the crude from Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, the crude of Trinidad and Tobago was actually fetching over WTI pricing. So again, a complete distortion of reality in an attempt to panic the population. So what the advice was that E&P could go forward, but the refinery could not. And you had to quarterize the refinery, Madam Speaker. And I'd just like to say at this stage, the whole restructuring exercise was something that took time. The restructuring exercise and the breaking it up into the 4 companies was at the end of a process. And what was said at the end of that process is, quarterize the refinery. Put it in an entity that if there's a future for it, it is not bringing down the rest. Petrotrin is not being shut down. I heard the member for Point Up here once again trying to suggest to the population that all of the liabilities of Petrotrin would be lost, and what about all the securitization? And the Minister of Finance will deal with it, but I'll mark the point now. Petrotrin's assets were not encumbered. So that is why this vesting order can work. And what we're doing is Petrotrin remains alive to deal with all of the legacy issues. A holding company was set up that will own Petrotrin. The refinery has been quarterized, and that has been put into Guaracara Refining Company Limited. Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited is for terminaling. That's fuel trading and product supply. Heritage Petroleum Company Limited is for exploration and production, Madam Speaker. And these will all go up to Trinidad Petroleum Holdings Limited.
Jobs.
They talk about the loss of jobs. The truth is everybody knew that unfortunately it had reached a stage that could not continue anymore, that there quite simply were too many jobs and it was dragging. You heard the Minister of Finance give the details. An annual wage bill of over $2 billion. You ask the people in Trinidad and Tobago, those who walk in Port of Spain, North, St. Anne's West, if we can really understand what a wage bill of $2 billion is, right? But it was dragging down, as I've just said, the sovereign rating was being dragged down by the single entity, Petrotrin. So what we had to do, Madam Speaker, was deal with it. And I stand here today without fear of contradiction, no matter how anyone tries to distort the truth and the reality. And I say that what was decided and what was given the blessing of cabinet and is now being implemented is what the country needs at this point in time. And this administration did the difficult task, but only at the end, Madam Speaker, of a meticulous process where we continue to ask for more information, we continue to give ideas, we continue to push in different directions. And I'd like to say that anyone following this seriously, I've heard it said that the union had a proposal that could go forward. The Prime Minister wrote to the union and told them any viable business plan you have, send it to the company and it will be dealt with. But unfortunately, when the union was giving evidence in the industrial court, they could not even remember who is the person supposed to give them this $25+ billion for the refinery. Is that a serious proposal? But what I'd like to say and repeat here today, Madam Speaker, is what we have instructed the board of Petrotrin to do, and they're doing it, is put the refinery and its assets in a quarterized company, Guaracara Refining Company Limited, and an RFP process internationally is going to be set up where a data room will be created, and anyone who thinks they have a plan or a proposal and can make that refinery viable would be able to get into that RFP process, go through a proper evaluation, and at the end of the day, the board and the government will look at the outcome of that, and if it is something that is viable for Trinidad and Tobago, I am sure it will get the go-ahead. But in the meantime, we had to quarterize it to allow the rest to grow. There will be jobs. We've been told the startup is 800 in Heritage Petroleum Company Limited.
Honourable Member, your original time is now spent. You're entitled to 15 more minutes to wind up your presentation. You may proceed.
Right? Sorry, Madam Speaker. So Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, a startup of 800 jobs. The holding company must have jobs in it as well to run the whole operation. Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited, which is for the terminaling, 200 jobs. And this is the start. So don't cry the gloom and doom. And I'll also say that when they did an analysis, because this is how detailed the analysis was, Madam Speaker, when the board brought the information to the cabinet, we asked the question, how many persons are close to retirement? And out of that figure of the 3,000, there were 1,800 workers that were a couple years away from early retirement. And those are the persons who got those packages. And when we talk, I heard the use of the word severance by point of pay. I'd like to just correct that once again. Everyone has been terminated. There is no severance in a situation like that. But what the cabinet decided and gave the blessings to the board to do, and they were not obligated to do this in law. This is an important point, Madam Speaker. When you're shutting down a whole operation, the whole operation, you're not obligated to pay severance. There's a Privy Council decision to that effect. The government told the board, offer the OWTU rates of severance. I put on the record here today for the population of Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker, those formulas for payments are 75 to 100% more than what the law and the statute books are.
Repeat that.
So the workers are getting between 75 to 100% enhanced payment to what the law and the statute book is.
Whilst they were not entitled to.
That is what they're being paid. I hear murmurings on the other side from people who've never practiced in the industrial court. I practice there. They're not entitled to payments, but the government took the decision, and it will cost the taxpayers $2 billion.
All temporary workers being
Temporary workers, once you qualify over a certain period of time, you've been there for over 5 years, you've worked 120 days for the year, they are getting packages as well. We have done everything we can to ensure that the workers are looked after. But Madam Speaker, as an administration, we could not afford, especially at this stage, we're now finding our feet after the instability left behind, to allow another sovereign downgrade. And I'd like to say at this point in time as well to the population, Madam Speaker, that the Petroleum board members, some of them who have been tasked with the refinancing and the financing of the new entities going forward, along with the technocrats in the Ministry of Finance, have gone to the international market. They have already gone to the international market, not only for the refinancing of the 2 bonds, but for the refinancing of the whole of these new business, this whole new business product going forward and the structure. And you know what we're told? Contrary to what you'll hear, and we've heard from the other side, the sovereign rating agencies have endorsed what they've seen as a planned restructuring, and what we're here today to do, this bill, is a composite part of it. It is an important part of it. And any lawyer coming out of law school will know this is the simplest fashion and form to vest the assets of one entity, and then they still add from Trinidad and Texaco into the 4 various entities I've just described, Madam Speaker. But the important point, and I tell the people of Trinidad and Tobago here today, is the rating agencies and the foreign refinanciers have all endorsed this restructuring plan. So rather than hear about the doom and gloom and etc., Madam Speaker, what has actually happened is the country's sovereign rating, at minimum, has been saved by this administration having the wherewithal to do it in a proper way and to allow this proper restructuring to take place, Madam Speaker. Again, the personalization and the attack on Mr. Wiley. Mr. Wiley's CV speaks as to the amount of experience he has in here. And I've heard, because the opposition have nothing to say, they can't catch the administration on anything. Let me tell you what happened. As what the Prime Minister indicated last week, Madam Speaker, is Mr. Wiley was hired in August. The truth is, by August we knew, even before then we knew, that if there was one part of the Petroleum operation that could go forward in a viable entity, was exploration and production. Go and drill for oil and sell the oil on an international market. And that is what Mr. Wiley was hired to do. You don't wait for the incorporation of the new entity. We all knew, anybody in the oil industry knows an oil company has to explore and produce oil and sell it. So we found, again, and it wasn't done locally, what the Petroleum board at the time did was hire 2 international recruiting firms with expertise in oil and gas. And it was narrowed down, I think, in the end to a Japanese, Mr. Wiley, and I believe an Iranian, by international recruiters, and he was brought in to lead the E&P. So don't allow, Madam Speaker, and the population of Trinidad and Tobago, don't allow yourselves to be distracted by the noise. Mr. Wiley is the expert who's been chosen to lead the E&P operation. We've heard the Minister of Finance say that the first shipment of crude has gone out. That crude before was being sucked up by the refinery. When we sell crude, we earn foreign exchange. We are earning foreign exchange at $3 over the WTI pricing for oil. That is the value of Trinidad and Tobago's crude oil. That is a fact, Madam Speaker. So that is why Mr. Wiley was hired. And now that we've gone through the restructuring exercise and the Cabinet approved the structure, and I'll tell you, Madam Speaker, that when the board came and presented to the Cabinet looked at the presentation and said, well, hold on. You should set up another new company. And that is how the quarterization of the refinery came to be. because there was some person saying just mothball it and park it up, and the cabinet took the decision, instructed they form a new company, quarterize and put the refinery assets there. And that is how you have that SPV now that will invite requests for proposals, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, I think by now the country knows the various entities that have been set up for this restructuring exercise. The Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, which will be located in Santa Flora and Point Fortin, and will have the responsibility for all exploration and production assets, including the E&P contracts, with revenue generated through crude sales and crude storage. Terminaling, which is the fuel trading and product supply activities, will be undertaken by Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited, Paria Fuel, which will be located in Pointe-a-Pierre and will be responsible, Madam Speaker, for trading and product supply, logistics, terminaling, and product handling. With Heritage Petroleum, the Guaracara Refining Company Limited will be responsible for preservation of the refinery assets, in addition to providing utility services to Paria Fuel and Petrotrin. Petrotrin will remain as a member of the group of subsidiaries held by the holding company, Trinidad Petroleum Holdings Limited. Petrotrin has not been shut down. It remains to deal with legacy items. Madam Speaker, there is absolutely nothing that is wrong with this vesting bill. This is the simplest way to gather the assets and hive them off to the entities that have been set up for the restructuring. And what I can say again, without fear of contradiction, Madam Speaker, is if this restructuring did not take place in the manner that it took place, Trinidad and Tobago would be a very, very, very different environment, economic environment today. So I thank this cabinet and my cabinet colleagues for taking those difficult decisions. Madam Speaker, with those few words, I thank you for the opportunity to have conference.
Member for Caroni East.
Madam Speaker, it is a privilege and I consider it an honor to speak on this bill presented today by the government, 17 days before the closure of all of Petrotrin. 17 days before a closure of such a large company worth more than 50 billion in assets, to bring this 17 days before the closure to Parliament. It is an insult to the Parliament, it is an insult to the opposition, it is an insult to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. When particularly almost 9,000 employees, they want to say 3,005, and what else is temporary, but it's close to 9,000 employees who are going to be directly affected as a result of this closure by these companies. Madam Speaker, this issue of restructuring of Petrotrin came like a thief in the night, with secrecy, people operating quietly, doing their own thing and not letting the population know, and not even letting the trade union know. When a memorandum of understanding was signed between the trade union and the Rowley-led government, and the union never expected anything like this to come and confront them all of a sudden. So even the union, which is the major stakeholder, was caught in the middle of the night, not knowing what this government was doing. You know, it is often said that transparency and accountability is the heart of democracy. But when secrecy abounds, it is the heart of authoritarianism, autocracy, and treachery. Authoritarianism and dictatorship seem to be the hallmark of this present government, Madam Speaker. Everything is in secret, and this petroleum issue and Petrotrin issue, which has been brought to us as a miscellaneous provisions, Heritage Petroleum, Paria Fuel Trading, and Guaracara Refining Vesting Bill 2018, which has 5 parts, 8 clauses, 6 schedules. And as I'm on that, Madam Speaker, they have treated this opposition with contempt. They have provided some schedules, Madam Speaker. You have to be a quantity surveyor. You have to use a microscope. You don't know what is the addendum at the bottom of each one of these. They say is map A, map B, map C, and you can't read a thing from this, Madam Speaker. How insulting it is to us. Very insulting. We would show this to any quantity surveyor, land surveyor, and they themselves will not be able to interpret all of this, Madam Speaker. So it's a sham. It's a sham. You bring something for us a few days before everything closed down, and this is what you bring for us. And what about the assets and so on? They just have put all the assets in little categories, and nobody knows what are the true assets and liabilities of Petroleum. You would expect that a serious government would bring audited statements, up-to-date audited statements, and financial management statements accompanying this so that the country can see what are the assets and what are the liabilities. And then they ought to have decided which assets will go in which one of these companies and which liabilities which will go into which company. But no, contempt again for the people, contempt for the opposition. Madam Speaker, may we remind this government that 345,000 people voted for this opposition, and we will never remain silent. We will speak out for the people. Madam Speaker, this Petroleum bill, under this Prime Minister Rowley-led administration, can be described as industrial vandalism. Yes. The swift collapse of Petroleum between 2015, when the PNM took office, and 2018 is a direct result of the mishandling by this PNM administration and the mishandling from 2002 to 2010 by the Manning administration, Manning PNM administration, and where 3 members and possibly 4 members of the now government were part of those governments, cabinet in 2002 to 2010. So I will come to some of the other facts. So since taking office, yes, the member, I believe the member for Diego Martin West, the member for Diego Martin Northeast, the member for Camila's vision. Aruka Maloney, and possibly Laventille West. But they know that they were part of the government between 2002 to 2010. And we will come to that. Madam Speaker, since the Swin South? Yes. Since taking office, Madam Speaker, this government effected several changes to the board. They had appointed Energy Committee, which many members of the Energy Committee left for one reason or the other. And there has been fluctuating management. Yes. Didn't Abdullah leave? But that was one person.
Honorable members. Honorable members. Member for Carney East, could you please continue?
Madam Speaker, there has been fluctuating management. And it was perhaps because the people who were in there were uncomfortable with the decisions being taken. That's why they left. This administration, they have taken politically appointed boards and fired the management team, making poor qualified political appointees managers in a number of state enterprises in this. And we must not forget the Malcolm Jones death was at the heart of the urgency of this crisis. And it is the detail that this present government has glossed over in the public utterances on this matter. The impact of the, God bless his soul, a very nice person, but the impact of his decisions meant that there was a debt of approximately $12 billion at the end of the Manning's P&M term in 2010 when we came into office. $12 billion in debt, Madam Speaker. So the whole transition of Petrotrin can be described as messy, awkward, chaotic, lack of information, secretive, heartless, with gross incompetence and mismanagement by this P&M administration. The P&M went about this country, unbelievably so, trying to convince the population that the closure of Petrotrin is a good thing. The Prime Minister went from night to night all over the country. It's a good thing. We have to close it down because you know what is happening? We wouldn't have money. Petrotrin wasting all the money. And the Prime Minister make himself to be a savior. He's saving the country. But it's far from the truth, Madam Speaker. Far from the truth. And when we see that the heritage, the formation of the Heritage Company and the Paria Company, we see them for the first time as advertisements. Yes. Yeah. How insulting again to the people. You see advertisement. When I open the newspaper, I see Heritage. And then the next day I see Paria, like a thief in the night. What is that? Yeah. And you cannot imagine, we as members of Parliament, representing thousands and thousands of people, don't know what Heritage and Paria were on the newspaper. I wanted to know if it was a private company coming somewhere to employ people in some other industry. It's only when I read the details of it, I realized it was secretive on the part of this government again. They're hiding things. Why were they hiding? And they don't seem to know what they want to do. 1 minute, Espinay said they're not closing down Petrotrin. Today, and then the government said they're closing it down. Today, 2 members of the government, one saying they're closing it down, the next say they're not closing down. And the one who said they're not closing down said just before that they're closing it down. So that's why pure confusion. He said they're closing it down so people can't expect to get their money. Yeah. The member for the Spin North sentence. Yeah. Madam Speaker, this is a deliberate pauperization of the hard-working people of this country. And the workers must not be the scapegoat for the PNM's incompetence and mismanagement, for poor decision-making by successive PNM administrations. Who will be next, Madam Speaker? Which enterprise will be next? Yes. Every time the PNM came into office, different administrations, they have destroyed the lives of people. In Caroni Limited closure, Caroni 95, they destroyed the lives over 100,000 people in central Trinidad. And the people were made into snow cone vendors and double vendors. Wicked. 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 And here they're coming again to pauperize the entire of central Trinidad, South Trinidad, and by extension the whole of Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker. When they closed down Caroni 1975, it was Mr. Pandey in Parliament said, "You have scorched the earth, and the earth will never forgive you." Again, PNM, you have scorched the lives of the people, and the people will never forgive you for what you are doing to the people. So they destroyed Caroni in 2003. At BWIA, they spent $1.5 billion in a restructuring, and they only changed 2 things at the end of the plane. 2 pictures for $1.5 billion. So BWIA, what next? Caroni 1975 Limited, what next? Petrotrin 2018, what next? Something coming again. TSTT is on the horizon. Yeah, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, today we were arraigned with the Minister of Finance speaking about plant upgrades failed to improve. Cost of upgrades loaded the company with debt. 12 billion in August 2019. Government 2.7 billion loan guarantee. GOP completed in 2013, up from 2.4 billion. GTL 1.5 to 2.5 billion. Ultra low sulfur diesel 791 million to 2.9 billion. 2.5 billion. If I were the Minister of Finance, I would feel ashamed to make those statements because he was part of the government that caused these things to happen. He was part of a government between 2002 to 2010 that created this havoc on the lives of the people and created this financial havoc. Madam Speaker, PNM's borrowing on the bonds, on the two bonds in 2007 and 2009, have cost our people so far $18.4 billion TT and counting. And I will explain that. Petrotrin debt, a 10-year bond, $850 million US in 2009. PNM time, nearly $6 billion at 9.5% interest. Senator Mark and myself were members of a joint select committee in 2009 when we had Petrotrin before us. Mr. Malcolm Jones and a number of directors who were part of Petrotrin said that they couldn't get something cheaper than 9.5% interest. Imagine 9.5% interest. You take $850 million US when interest was 2%. Yes. That is fraud, Madam Speaker. Criminal. And it's criminal in nature. Criminal. Sorry, Madam Speaker.
So you will withdraw that word, and I'm sure you can find a different way to say it.
It was not good economic and financial practice at that time. So they took $850 million bond, US, nearly $6 billion TT, at 9.5%. And Madam Speaker, the other one, 15-year bond, $750 million US in 2007, near $6 billion TT at 6% interest. Madam Speaker, the world was giving away money, 2%, 2.5%, 1% above LIBOR. LIBOR was 1.5%. So who did this, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, the PNM administration and the PNM boards of Petrotrin did this. So now today they're coming as town criers and they're saying they met this and they met that. When they created the havoc, they created the havoc. So therefore, a total of $11.3 billion in borrowing in bonds in 2007, 2009. Petrotrin and the government has paid so far for 9 years, Madam Speaker. You know what this country has had to pay in interest for the 9 years? $850 million US bond at 9.5%. 85%, 9.5% for 9 years is around 85%. 85% of 850 million is 756 million US, equal 4.8 billion TT. So on the first bond in 2009, in the 9 years, we have had to pay $4.8 billion in interest alone. Wow. In interest alone. And the Minister of Finance, you cannot come and fool this population anymore. We can calculate just like you can calculate, and you cannot fool us. We are bright people on this side. Yeah. And if you take 3 or 4 of us with degrees, we have more degrees than all on the other side. I know you'd like that. Don't worry. That's a little joke. That's a little joke.
Some don't have schooling.
Look.
Honorable members, it seems that Carney has a flair for creating excitement, but I would like to hear his contribution, and I'm getting great difficulties. So please.
Madam Speaker, thank you. I will make sure that my comments come to you directly. 8 years interest on $750 million US at 6% between 2007 to 2018. Sorry, 11 years. $495 million US on interest. That's another 2.88 billion TT. So total interest paid so far, I drew this through you, Madam Speaker, to the Minister of Finance. Between 2007 and 2018, the total interest paid so far has been 4.8 plus 2.9 is 7.7 billion TT. Also, on the principal, 7.7 billion TT have been paid in interest on those 2 bonds since 2007 to 2018. And that, yeah. And also, out of the 750 million US bond, over 500 million US of that have been paid already by Petrotrin. Petrotrin.
Repeat that, man.
So 500 million US or 3.2 billion TT of the 750 million US bond have been paid by Petrotrin already. So total paid so far by Petrotrin from 2007 to 2018 by the people of Trinidad and Tobago, 11 billion TT on principal and interest on the two bonds, and we're still owing 250 million US. So in summary, the PNM's borrowing on the two bonds in 2007 and 2009 have cost our people so far 18.4 billion TT and counting. And let me re-emphasize, there are present members of this government who were members of those governments when all these things took place. And so therefore today, they have no moral authority to come and discuss and debate anything. And therefore the Minister of Finance should not have even attempted to talk about anything about the finance of this company, when they created the fiasco that we're in now. And so they want to pass the buck on Petrotrin mismanagement. You are responsible as a cabinet. You are responsible as a government. And therefore, if you do not take your responsibility, the Prime Minister now was a member of this government in 2009.
Honourable members, the crosstalk is getting excessive. I'm having great difficulty in hearing the member for Caroni East, who usually gives me no difficulty, auditory difficulties. Could you all please keep the levels down? Member for Caroni East.
Our Honourable Prime Minister, very honourable, was a member of this government in 2009 when he knew what was going on then, but he said he was a member of the backbench, so he doesn't want to take the responsibility. But you all have to take the responsibility, whether backbench, front bench, or wherever you were part of the government.
Side bench.
And then let me just give you some minor details of some of these little cost overruns, Madam Speaker. The World GTL. Petrotrin entered into the GTL agreement in 2005, PNM, in conjunction with World GTL, establishing a 49-51 partnership with 49% Petrotrin. But the partner, GTL, could not come up with the money for their 51%, and Petrotrin took the decision to purchase the entire loan with Credit Suisse. So you form a partnership. The partner not putting any money, and you take the responsibility for the 100%. So what was that small plant initiative to cost the country, which was started in 2005? $3.3 billion. It went up from 160 million US to $3.3 billion. And you know what they sell it for to Nikwan? 35 million US, but Nikwan only paying 15 million US. Yeah? So you take a 3.4, no, that went into receivership in 2009 under PNM administration, so don't try and come and blame the opposition. Don't come and try to blame us now. That went into receivership in 2009, and Pricewaterhouse were the receivers, and they are the one who made the deal with Nikwan. And Madam Speaker, my colleague touched on it, and their whole loads, sorry, Madam Speaker, yeah. There are whole loads of things. Nikwan, WGTL deal to cost, no cost to TT taxpayers, that's what they're saying. The editorial of one of the newspapers said, whoa, not so fast on World GTL, Nikwan deal. Next newspaper said, government dust off gas to liquid project. Yes. Next one, new partner for GTL project. Next one, OWTO has questions on the World GTL, and so on. Madam Speaker, you take a $3.6 billion and you sell it off 100 million. And then in addition to that, you say I'm giving you gas for 25 years, and I'm giving you that gas. Yeah? That is PNM style, Madam Speaker. PNM style. What about the ultra-low sulfur diesel project? Where is that located in the assets, Honorable Minister? That is one of the plans in the refinery. Is that located in Guaracara as an asset? Because it still has not been completed. The project commenced in 2009. PNM. There was question between Samsung and Petroleum on this matter. There were claims against Samsung, and there were claims by Samsung against Petroleum. That ultra-low sulfur diesel project is now costing 3.3 billion TT. Where are the litigious matters placed in terms of the finance? Would it be considered, which one of the companies that would be considered? Is it the Petroleum holding company? Who is going to be responsible for that? And up to today, the ultra-low sulfur diesel project is still not operational. Gas optimization project. Madam Speaker, that is a scandal. Biggest scandal of any type of energy company with refining. You won't see that anywhere else, you know. It could only happen in Trinidad. Petroleum indicated that there have been very significant cost and schedule overruns during the recent executions of GOP, that's Gas Optimization Plan, with total project escalating from, the project escalated from US $650 million in 2006 to US $1.48 billion. 830 million US escalation in the GOP plant, gas optimization project. 2006 under PNM administration again. Then there is the construction of a new office, head office, which was supposed to be about 65 million. That gone to 400 million, and it's like a, yeah. So when we speak about the gas optimization project, 5 new plants were supposed to be part of that. Madam Speaker, I had the privilege of working in Petroleum in Texaco in those days, in late 1968, 69, 67, 68. I used to climb tanks, go and sample the big tanks. What? Go on a ship and sample the tanks in a ship. Come back to the refinery lab, do spectrophotometric analyses to check whether they have benzene, toluene, and xylene in the normal paraffin plants. I worked with Mr. Manning's father when he was the head of the refinery. Yes, my present Prime Minister knows that because we have been associated over 40-something years. And we know where we have all worked and so on. So the fluid catalytic cracking unit, isomerization unit, the new continuous catalyst regenerating platform units called CCR, new alkylation unit, sulfuric acid regenerating unit, off-site and utilities to provide additional facilities for water treatment, steam generation, electrical power to improve reliability of existing plants. So all cost overruns close to over $3 billion in the gas and some of these plants are still not working up to today, Madam Speaker. I understand that the JSC of 2015, the members were told that the cap cracker was taken out of service because the integrity of the fractioning columns was being questioned. So is the acid and alkylation unit were also shut down. So, Madam Speaker, this opposition hold the members of those governments accountable for the massive cost overruns and the great financial mismanagement that occurred between 2002 to 2010, particularly, and the mismanagement that have been occurring between 2015 and 2018. Madam Speaker, let me come closer to the bill. We want to ask the government, with all these liabilities, where are they being placed? Which one of the companies? Is it Heritage? Is it Paria? Is it Guaracara? If not, is it going to be, how is it going to be placed? Is it the Petrotrin Holding Company, or is it Petrotrin? These are 5 companies, but today we have before us 3 companies which you speak about vesting. And today we were informed that you have the holding company taking care of all the subsidiary companies, and you still have Petrotrin. The question we want to ask, do we have Petrotrin open still, or is it going to be closed? You must answer that. Yeah, because you were confusing on both sides. You were confusing.
Everybody have a different story and different version.
Madam Speaker.
Yes.
In this bill, there are some questions that still have to be answered. We don't know the asset base of the entire of these 3 or 4 companies.
Agreed.
That's still questionable, and we believe as a responsible government, you should try to find the answer for that. And Petrotrin 2018 financial year ended on this September 30th, 2018. And normally by now, they would have released unaudited financials. This is not yet available. These unaudited accounts will be important to undertaking this process of dividing up the balance sheet of Petrotrin. The bill makes no mention of liabilities. This means Petrotrin is being stripped of assets, and is it being left with the debt alone, with the loans and bonds? Has this been communicated with the creditors of Petrotrin, who no doubt would be concerned that the company that owes them money now has no assets? So if you strip Petrotrin of all their assets, you put the liabilities there. There are people who they owe. How would these people feel if they know that there are no assets so that they can retrieve their money? How would the stripping of the assets of Petrotrin affect the company's ability to refinance the US $850 million bond payment due in August 2019? We have not heard in detail what you're going to do. You said that you're going to refinance it. How you're going to refinance it, with whom you're going to refinance, and at what percentage you're going to refinance at. Not the 9.5% which you did before. Would this now mean that it is inevitable that a government guarantee will be required, which has the consequence of increasing national debt stock? So the 850 million US, are you as a government guaranteeing that debt? And where is that going to be put?
Your original speaking time is now spent. You're entitled to 15 more minutes to wind up your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for the extension. No mention is made in the bill about the Augustus Long Hospital. I saw in the schedule, your schedule did not cross the main road by Petrotrin. It came from the highway and it ended by the Petrotrin gate. But the Augustus Long Hospital is on the other side of the road. And no mention has been made of that and what is going to happen to the retirement benefit obligations. My colleague, the member for Couva South, will probably speak about that for the medical benefits. It is assumed that this remains in old Petrotrin. Madam Speaker, Heritage Petrotrin. What are the consequences for the transition from Petrotrin to Heritage as it relates to oversight of the continuous operations of Trinma and the oil-producing landfills post-November 30th, 2018? You remember we have Trinma. What's the relationship between this new company and Trinma? Next point, management of relationships with joint venture partners. I'm speaking about the Heritage Petroleum, such as lease operators, farm-out operators, IPSCs, Shell, NMCA, etc. This is provided for in the bill by way of transfer to Heritage, but many of these joint venture partners do not know what is going on. They are joint ventures with Petrotrin and others, but the joint ventures have they told the joint venture partners what the issues are and how they're going to manage the joint ventures. Paria Fuel Trading Company. As it relates to Paria, in the transition from diesel and gasoline exports to import, the population needs to be guaranteed about the quality of the fuel that is being imported, what is the octane rating, what is the cetane rating, what is the sulfur content. Already on social media, there is concern being expressed that fuel is burning faster than before. Whether real or imagined, the population needs to be guaranteed, Madam Speaker. Now, Guaracara refining, that's the fourth other part of the bill. Mothballing of the refinery. We have heard the Minister speak about the sulfuric acid and the mothballing requirements of the refinery. This is a very specialist and dangerous operation, which we know, involving some 25 process units. What is the cost of mothballing in the refinery? We don't have an answer and a clue to that, because you have to have high-powered nitrogen through all the chambers and cylinders. And given that Guaracara has no revenue-generating assets, how is this mothballing going to be paid for? Mothballing will incur an annual and ongoing cost. So the population needs to know what will be the recurrent type of cost in this mothballing exercise for the refinery. Yeah. I have some issues here with what the Minister of Energy had said and so on. What do I say about Petroleum, the lesser better? Again, when I speak of Petroleum, it's not a nice story. I feel great pain to see the state of the company. The people of Trinidad and Tobago see great pain in losing their jobs today, Madam Speaker. If Petroleum is not handled properly, it could bankrupt this country. It is serious as that. Well, they mishandled Petroleum for years, and that's why they're bankrupting the country now, Madam Speaker. So the intent of the bill, vesting the new companies and assets, this is where we have reached. It's an uncertain future. There are a number of questions still. I think my colleague might have asked it. Who are the shareholders of these new companies? Who are the directors? What will be their payments and their salaries and so on? What would be the total amount for these 4 companies? And where are you going to transfer some of these liabilities into which companies? Madam Speaker, Petroleum followed International Accounting Standard 19, IAS 19, which required inter alia, and my colleague, member for Cooper South, might expand on this, accrual and provision of post-retirement benefits, including pension and medical. So you have to provide for these pensions and medicals, but nothing is being said about it. So you have approximately 20,000 former members and their families of Petroleum who no answers have been given about their medical benefits. And they're asking questions. What will happen to their medical plans, and where would they get the medical treatment? The government has to answer this question. Then there's the question of loss of foreign exchange. Madam Speaker, in the absence of the refinery, Trinidad and Tobago will be required to import some 25,000 barrels of finished refined product for local needs at a price delivered to point of pay of about US $90 per barrel, inclusive of foreign refineries, margin, shipping, and insurance costs, costing some US 2.250, well, 2,250,000 daily. The loss of foreign exchange would therefore be in the range of some US 250,000 daily, compared with at least the US 2.3 billion paid annually in taxes by Petroleum up to 2015. So remember, the people who you are sending home used to pay taxes, and the tax payment for the Petroleum employees came up to close to over $2 billion per year. So you're losing that. And by importing the fuel and exporting your oil, you're losing close to 250,000 US dollars per day. Yeah? So, Madam Speaker, these are some of the issues which I wanted to raise to the attention. There are many more, but the time will not permit me to do that in terms of the other issues around the 3 companies. But what happened when we were in office with Petroleum? We ended the fiasco that was Bechtel's contracts with Petrotrin on the gasoline optimization program. We finished the GOP in 2013 and contained cost overruns. From 2010 to 2015, oil production at Petrotrin was stabilized and was increasing. We secured a major loan for US $500 million from Credit Suisse without a guarantee from government. We hired highly competent managers in Ron Hoff and John Barden. These were two of the best in the world. They fired them. And I understand Mr. Espinay wanted to rehire them, but they say we're not coming back. John Hoff and Ron Hoff and John Barden, two world expertise. We conducted several major maintenance projects in the refinery that were overdue for many years.
1 minute. I think I was understanding before where you're going, but right now I'm really having a little challenge in understanding the relevance. And unless you quickly tie that up into what is the substance of the matter before us, I'll have to ask you to move on to your other points.
Thank you. We would not have closed down the refinery based on our performance over the period 2010 to 15. We would have continued with a great performance and ensured that the lives and the jobs of thousands of our people were kept intact. And we would not have done what this PNM administration is doing to this refinery. And we saw Petrotrin paying $20 billion in taxes and royalties and other payments during our time. And so, Madam Speaker, in 2015, Petrotrin began to turn a profit. And within a quarter period, we had an $85 million profit in 2015. So where has all this gone? So in conclusion, Madam Speaker, without doubt, this action by this government threatens to throw our beleaguered nation, battered by punitive, destructive, clueless, incompetent, and if I may say, spiteful regime, further into the throes of social, economic, and general unrest and destabilization, just with this simple act, Madam Speaker. The PNM is dealing with this as a company crisis, but Petrotrin is a metaphor for 13 years of PNM's non-performance and crisis management without thought, care for workers, or the future of the country. Why the secrecy all along, Madam Speaker? Why the darkness? What is this really going to cost? Who seeks to benefit from this closure? Why can't this government ever come clean on selling off our patrimony? And we have one message for this government today. The people of Trinidad and Tobago have lost total confidence in you. You continue to show that from what you're doing, that you don't care about the future lives of our people. You have failed to manage our affairs, and the time has come for you to step down and give the people of Trinidad and Tobago the chance to a team that has the will, the experience, and the competence to get the job done. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for San Fernando West.
Madam Speaker, I want to dive directly and immediately into the response to this debate. You see, the honourable member for Caroni East stood up and made a number of outstanding statements that I want to just directly deal with. First word that popped out Caroni East's mouth: secrecy.
Yeah, I did.
Hear the word. Shrouded in secrecy, deceptive government, we are told nothing. How are we supposed to deal with this bill? Because we don't know what the assets are. You need a quantity surveyor, you need an accountant, you need a microscope basically to read the bill. That's what the member said in the round. Schedules unintelligible. Hear the honourable member. How are we to make a decision about vesting if we don't know the asset base? This government is secret. That's what the honourable member said. Let me point the honourable member to two particular events as it relates to assets. Number one, as he stands a distinguished member of this House, having sat for many years in the Parliament, in the Senate and in the House, ever heard of something called the Public Accounts Committee?
Yes, but that's what I quoted from.
Ever heard of something called the Internet? Ever heard of the publication of accounts in the public domain for Petrotrin. All accounts for Petrotrin, interim, managerial, and audited accounts are in the public domain. But the honorable members opposite are just too lazy, intellectually lazy, Madam Speaker. Intellectually lazy, that it is easier to come to this parliament and just say secrecy, we don't know what the assets are. Madam Speaker, I cannot assist lazy intellectualism when it transcends itself into untruths. So, Madam Speaker, if the honourable member would bother himself after saying...
Madam Speaker, 48, can I direct you to 48, 1, 4, and 6, Madam Speaker?
Okay. Well, 48.6 deals with imputed improper motives. So I rule against you on 48.6. And you said 48.1, I believe you said, which is irrelevant, and this is in direct response to something was raised here. Are you raising something else from your chair?
48.4, ma'am, insulting language. I was looking at that.
I overrule on intellectually lazy. I am certain I've sat here and heard the word slothful. I'm sure I've sat here and heard that, which means the same thing, lazy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, let me return to this. On the allegation of secrecy, on the charade that the opposition comes with that this government is hiding something, the first point made by my learned colleague Carney East was that we don't know what the assets are. And the country does not know what the assets are, because the honourable member who speaks for 300,000+ people that the honourable member said the UNC represents, as the voice for the people that elected the UNC members into office, not one of them have the ability to direct their learned member and colleague to what is published information in the House of Representatives, on the floor of the Parliament, and on the internet, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, I reject outright and out of hand the intellectual laziness of my learned colleagues in coming to this floor as they do. Let's deal with untruth number 2, Madam Speaker. Untruth number 2. We cannot support this vesting because we don't know what the liabilities are. They haven't said what the liabilities are. And the vesting order does not deal with liabilities. Madam Speaker, if there was a degree beyond intellectual laziness that I could associate now, I'd be searching for that. So let's get into it. Number 1, audited financial statements, managerial accounts, interim financial statements in the public domain on the desk of this Parliament speak to liabilities. Liabilities are stood against assets. It is on the back of that that our ratings have been premised insofar as state enterprises and contingent liabilities for them factor. Liabilities are factored by the financial institutions that lend us the money to deal with this. Madam Speaker, the bill before us itself treats with all assets of Petrotrin relative to, for instance, exploration and production in Clause 3, described in Schedule 1 are transferred, but here Clause 4. All contracts described in Schedule 3, and here's what it effectively says. Heritage Petroleum is a party instead of Petrotrin. What the bill does, Madam Speaker, is it says anywhere and everywhere the word Petrotrin existed, in any contract, in any term, whether expressed or implied, substitute Petrotrin and put heritage. Oh, Madam Speaker, after read and spell?
For them, yes.
Madam Speaker, if you are substituting
Heritage, in the one case here, for Petrotrin into a contract. Obviously, whatever's in the contract runs with it. Liabilities in the contract run in the same way that Petrotrin was exposed to liabilities, Heritage is exposed to liabilities. You cannot understand that, most respectfully, honorable members. With all of the degrees that my learned colleague Carney East boasted as having, I will say two things. It doesn't show in the process of his analysis of the bill, and most certainly it pales in comparison.
Governor Prima, if you wish to join this debate, I assure you will get that opportunity. If you intend to invoke Standing Order 47, do it in the proper way. Please.
Madam Speaker. And secondly, all of the degrees espoused by my learned friend as better enabling him to understand the matters before us now pale in comparison to one person on this bench alone. The member for Diego Martin Northeast, who I think outstripped him in number of degrees. But Madam Speaker, that's churlish. That's churlish.
And quality.
To have to respond to a point like that. Madam Speaker, I say with respect to the concept of liabilities that they are to be found in the audited and other published accounts of Petrotrin. And secondly, Madam Speaker, obviously in the substitution by way of vesting, which this bill does, all rights, liabilities, exposures, and obligations run concomitant with the replacement.
Honorable members, it's now 4:30. We shall take the suspension now. This House is now suspended and will resume at 5 p.m.